Hello and welcome to Point and Clink here on twitch.tv/life action roleplay. I am your host, Ryan Omega, and I also have my co-host here, Tessa. If you can introduce yourself, please.
Oh, sure. Hi, I'm Tessa. I co-host this show, I guess.
Yeah. So
Fabulous.
excited.
What else?
Adorable.
Excellent intro.
Do you know what I realized? I realized I broke the format, which is basically say hi, Tessa, and you go
Oh,
hi.
right.
That's what it is. I
Oh.
so that's what probably threw us all off. So just letting everyone know, I just got my second shot of COVID vaccine today, this morning, and I was dealing with a little
Well done.
fatigue. So if there are things that are a little bit wackadoo, that's I blame it on the fatigue. In the meantime, let me go ahead and introduce our lovely, I want to say contestants, and that's not what this is, our lovely presenters. I'm going to start off with Diana. Say hi, Diana.
Ooh, are we competing for your love, Ryan?
Yes. Yes.
Hi, I'm Diana. What am I supposed to say? She, her pronouns, and what I'm drinking, or just hi, I'm Diana. And that's it.
Yeah, your pronouns. Anything about you, especially you are
Yeah, I'll do my whole spiel.
yeah, do your spiel and
Hi,
what you're
I'm-
presenting.
Cool. Hi, I'm Diana Leonard. I am an associate professor of psychology at Lewis and Clark College and a LARP designer and avid LARPer. And I also am Team Pfizer. And I am drinking a gin and tonic with a bit of Cointreau in it. And I'm going to be presenting on the neuroscience of bleed, which is the spillover from character to player.
All right. Next, we're gonna go over to Trevor. Say hi, Trevor.
Hi, everyone. I'm Trevor Gittlehuff, he, him. I'm going to be presenting on The Devil's Own Capitalist, Pirates and Gambling, which ties in with why I'm drinking some delicious rum to go with that. I'm an archaeologist by trade with a master's in maritime studies, specifically with indigenous and underwater archaeology. And yeah, hopefully I'll be able to interest you guys a little bit more in pirates. Not that really anyone's not interested in pirates.
Next, we're gonna go to Ruben. Say hi, Ruben.
Hi, Tessa. Oh wait, no, that's the wrong. Hi, my name's Ruben Bressler, better known on the internet as Mox Ruby. I've been making Magic the Gathering content for the internet since the early days of YouTube. I have my 15-year YouTube anniversary this year. I was one of the first 5 or so YouTube creators for Magic the Gathering. And I know about longevity in the Magic the Gathering industry. And that's what I'll be talking about today is the economy of Magic the Gathering and how they managed to create a bubble that hasn't burst for almost 30 years.
Yeah, nice. Next, we go to a familiar, lovely face that we all know and love. Say hi, Renee.
Hi, Renee. Ryan, we got to stop meeting like this.
I know. Like first I blew up your kingdom, and now you're here.
Kingdom? No. My company.
Your
It's
company.
worse.
Yes, much worse.
Hi, everybody. I am Renee Ritchie. She, they pronouns. Dealer's choice most days. I am a corporate drone by day, game writer, LARP runner, Twitch streamer, crafter, and Kinkster by night. I have credits all over a bunch of different properties, including, a lot of World of Darkness properties and some indie stuff, including stuff that's on Kickstarter right now. And today I'll be talking about how BDSM made me a better role player.
All right. And again, I am Ryan Omega, he, him pronouns, and you know me. I run this channel. I design games, do LARP stuff, do interesting content on live streams. I also work on um, events and projects, and I am going to be presenting on Pokemon and their marketing strategy from a my first job out of college was doing merchandising for anime for an online company, and I got to go to a very exclusive news event with Nintendo executives where they explicitly told us what their marketing strategy was. And there were only 50 of us in that room, so I'm going to share that with everyone here. All right. Tessa, if you can go over the rules.
All right. So I'm Tessa, she, her pronouns just in case. And I'm here to provide rules on how to drink, courtesy of my glowing pineapple full of vodka. So this is a drinking game slash presentation show slash TED Talk, and you will need to know a couple of things. For every 3 minutes you surpass during your presentation, you'll need to take a drink, which we can constitute as a healthy sip, a shot, however you truly feel in your heart of hearts, that counts as a drink. So 3 minutes, 6 minutes, 9 minutes, that'd be 3 drinks. You have to take them or delegate them to some of our contestants, as Ryan said. We also have further rules, such as if you have a disclaimer that you want to state before you make your presentation, that'll also be a drink. And any trigger warnings don't count. If you see a cat, which according to the chat, there was a cat, that also means we should take a drink, all of us. So
Right, 'cause we saw a
here's
cat.
to the first sip for on-screen cat.
Well done.
This
That's a
is an
Zoom
intense
rule,
choice.
not just a this show rule. Drinking
Unless you
to a
are the
cat.
cat
Unless
lawyer.
you are the cat, yeah.
We're,
I'm not a cat.
for those of you at home, maybe this is water. So we're not being forced to drink anything bad.
Mhm.
It's just
Mhm.
potentially water. Those are the major rules. I'll be giving time. And is there anything I missed, anyone?
In order to determine the lectures, we all roll d20s, and lowest roll goes first, and then we go in order. In the case that someone needs to present at a certain time due to circumstances, they are free to do that as needed. All right. So let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and roll. Oh, Ruben, you got a 19. Trevor, you got a 4.
I got a 14, but I rolled virtually.
Oh yeah, virtual is fine.
It's fine. That's an enormous D20.
I'm excited. Oh,
All
with
that. I thought
the
it was,
box for the others for the smaller
Right.
D20. Even
it's
better.
like a Matryoshka doll for D20s.
That is.
Yes.
That is a.
Is that a dice bag or a dice sculpture?
It's a dice die.
It's a die.
It's a-
Yeah,
it's a-
Case Poisol made this for me about 8 years ago.
Wow.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Holy cow! The world is freaking small. Like Case
Oh
was.
yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
They're great. Like
They are great.
I've known them for a while. Yeah.
Oh right, and I'm rolling mine. Really? I rolled a 2, so I'm gonna.
Yes, not the first one to go. I'll take it.
Oh, is
19.
we tied?
19.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay.
I thought I was going to be the last one with 18. And since we're talking about where our dice came from, my summer research students gave me this dice set. This is one of them.
Oh, that's so
Nice.
sweet.
Sentimental.
Oh, I
That's
should have
nice.
rolled. You know what? I should have rolled this die instead.
All right, Ruben and
Can
Renee.
I re-roll with my
Yeah.
fancy die?
Yeah,
Well,
go
we have
ahead
to
and
We have
re-roll.
to roll off anyway.
You have to roll off
That's true.
anyway.
Okay, we'll re-roll anyway. For my regular roll, I rolled the official Dungeons and Dragons dice because I also do an official Dungeons and Dragons live play show.
Yes.
The Broken Pact, which is a Magic the Gathering Dungeons and Dragons crossover show. And for Christmas, they sent me this Swarovski crystal D20.
That exists?
So I apparently
Yeah.
this is what they sent me.
Well, beat a 14, my friend.
Sure won't. That's a natural 1 on this.
Oh! Somebody bust out the soundboard for that. Wah, 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 wah.
That's okay. We could just be human soundboards. All right, but man, that means I have to go first. So it's going to be myself, then Trevor, then we have Tessa, Diana, Ruben, and Renee. That is the order. Okay. If there are audio issues, please let me know. Um, as again, I did just get the second vaccine, and so things may not be quite right, but and therefore that is my disclaimer for my presentation for before I begin. So
It's good for you to go first, I
There's a
think.
drink.
yeah, so actually, yeah, I will go first because that will actually help things out. Um, so I will go ahead and start. So, my presentation today is how Pokemon was built to be viral. Um, we all know that Pokemon is one of the most well known and most beloved video game properties in existence. It's actually the second most popular when you talk about like longevity. The first one is just happens to be things related to Mario. Surprisingly, and I thought Pokemon was more popular. Mario has just been in existence longer, and it has like it's presented a lot of innovation when it came to video gaming and uh, but let's get off of that and go back to Pokemon. So we're going to talk about how Pokemon was built to be viral. And we're going to talk about how did it get this way. As I mentioned earlier, I was very privileged to be part of a newsroom where some marketing executives came from Japan, from the actual Nintendo company itself, and they talk explicitly about how Pokemon became viral. Trying to find this information is difficult. When they had this news conference, I believe it was in the year 2000 or 1999. So trying to find any of that information right now is difficult. But there were only 50 seats that uh, of people that were allowed to be in that room, and I just happened to be one of the 50. And part of it is because um, one of the people in that room was Satoshi Tajiri, one of the creators of Pokemon. So we were able to ask very explicit questions about how it became viral. So we're going to tell you directly from them how they marketed Pokemon to be what it is. So we start off with the actual video game itself. So at the time in the early 90s in Japan, Nintendo and video games were originally considered boys' toys in Japan. In fact, that's what their markets were. Japan being a very gendered society tended to market things that way. So video games and techie things were considered boys' toys, and dolls and figures were considered girls' toys. We already know this from shonen and shoujo manga itself, in terms of like its own branding, and that's how they originally used. That's originally how they used video games. Um, and one of the things that was very very key into the development of um, Pokemon was it actually had a lot of objections first. They were like the idea of Pokemon was not attractive to anybody. Keep in mind that a lot of the arcade games were very action platform platformer based, and Japanese RPGs were a relatively new thing. So things like Dragon Quest, things like early Final Fantasy were like just experimental. But one of the things that they needed to do in order to make the concept work for Pokemon was they tried to innovate an idea where two people playing Game Boys would be fighting or connecting with each other. For that particular reason, the Game Link was specifically invented, and that would hook two Game Boys together in order to trade and in order to fight. Before then, personal gaming devices did not have this ability, but they wanted to do something like that because they figured that that the one-on-one battles, along with the collectability of Pokemon, was going to create a little bit of a community. So the idea of you have to catch them all was already built into this, and they were playing on um, young boys wanting to collect things like trading cards. And um, the original designers, again, didn't get a lot of support, but it wasn't until Shigeru Miyamoto, one of the foremost like people at Nintendo, decided to back them. It's like, okay, we're gonna try this, but it meant having a lot of money and capital in order to try something that hasn't been tried. Um, one of the They also had to figure out what the main concepts were, and again, the collectability was a big issue. Um, this was also one of the first times where, in the video game, the protagonist was a young child, someone that was going to be their age. Usually, a lot of your protagonists tend to be older, um, more superheroic. They're often fighting, but here they're not fighting at all, and that is also a dramatic change within Pokemon. Um, they also decided to go with the JRPG to a accessible to younger crowd. So if you look at Pokemon, technically it is the most popular Japanese RPG in existence because it has all of the classic elements of it, which is a lot of um, a lot of quest finding, some narratives driven story, collectability of people, and a lot of those measures towards a final boss. In this case, instead of defeating bosses of each layer, you were defeating Pokemon gym leaders. So it is structured in that particular way. So, um, so even though this was marketed towards boys, they realized um, that if you wanted to actually double your audience, you also need to market to girls as well. So then came the Pokemon anime. The Pokemon anime was not to reinforce Pokemon for boys, even though it did that. It was actually specifically created so that they could acquire girls into playing video games. Before then, there wasn't a lot of video games that were actually marketed to girls, but they thought, well, if we make something anime and we have a mascot or things that are cute, we will be able to attract young girls to play this game. Um, and the evidence of that was the mascot they created, Jigglypuff. I know that sounds like, okay, we all know who it is, but Jigglypuff was the first creation for Pokemon because it had the intent to actually attract girls. Because it had the features of it was pink, it was soft, it was cute, it was round. So all of the little features that should actually attract girls was put into one mascot. However, something else attracted more attention, and that was Pikachu. They saw that this little cute mouse actually got more people, more girls interested in the product because they tested it and that's who they were attracted to. So all of the stereotypes that they kind of went with like were voided by actual testing, and that's how Pikachu ended up being the mascot because the girls liked it more. They also liked the fact that Pikachu was a little bit rebellious and did not want to stay within the Pokeball, and young girls liked that because I guess to them it just felt more independent. So the interesting part was as they were presenting things, they said that this is essentially brought us to the next topic or the next step, which is merchandising. So by creating the merchandise like the stuffed animals and the other collectibles, you now have like a flurry of a cycle that will definitely uh, create like a viral brand as well as a very like popular uh, product. So it was game, anime, manga, merchandise, and repeat. The funny part was being in that room, they actually had the word profit in it. It was really, really surreal because in American presentations, you generally don't give this to the press, but in Japan, this was considered not weird at all. It was considered more, you just need to, this is exactly what this marketing tool is. You are trying to do this to make money. Um, However, in the transition from Japan, elsewhere, we come across a very interesting issue that was also a dreaded issue, and that is episode 6, the seizure episode. In the Pokemon anime, um, that event became a worldwide thing where everyone talked about episode 6. It was known for two things. Number one, it caused seizures of 400 children in Japan at the time. However, it was qualified by a couple of things. One is a lot of that was self reported. Only 6 children actually went to the hospital to be checked out for photosensitivity. The other thing that they failed to report at the time was a lot of the kids, when watching Pokemon, the way that they would watch TV was it was the only light source in the room and everything else was blacked out, like a movie theater. Young children in the 90s were told specifically, you shouldn't do that, it's bad for your eyes. Because of the quick alternating red and blue pattern, it's caused a photosensitivity trigger, and that's what caused the seizures. Um, However, instead of backing it down, Nintendo and Game Freak, the company that created Pokemon, decided to double down. They took the infamy of this seizure and decided that this would be the time to try to bring it to the US and to other countries. And all they had to do was just eliminate that one episode. But you ended up having different talk shows at the time, like David Letterman and the news, like covering Pokemon all over the world, so it was free advertising. So they decided to take advantage of it, and the end result was their gamble worked. Pokemon became a success, and everything worked from there. And that is my lecture for how Pokemon was built to be viral.
Wow. No, there's no such thing as bad news.
There is no such thing as bad news. That was the lesson.
Yeah. There's definitely that was definitely leveraging some what publicity that would be considered bad. And I remember as a kid hearing about that particular controversy, and I was about the age for that target market too. I actually actively avoided trying to get into Pokemon at that time because all of my other friends were into it, and now I have a Jigglypuff onesie at home.
You tried to be hipster by avoiding Jigglypuff, and it backfired so
Oh,
hard.
it backfired so hard. Like
Yeah,
25 years later.
I definitely
Yeah, I
see it
feel
in
old.
the bones of Pokemon that, you have to catch them all, not some, not most. You have to go and catch them all, which is inherently designed to be buy all this stuff, get more things, and yeah,
It's
does
also
not
continued-
surprising that it was designed to be viral.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it goes on with each one afterwards, again and
Yep.
again and again. They keep on adding more to catch and more to catch. It's a never-ending bubble, just like magic.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's super liminal advertising. They're not like trying to be subtle about it. They're like, you have to catch all of them, my children. You gotta do it. And we all
Yeah.
fell for it.
We all
right.
fell for it.
Oh,
I didn't. I definitely did not.
Ryan, I forgot to give you your time.
Oh yes.
It's 11 minutes and 20 seconds. So that'll be passing 3 and 6 and 9 and a disclaimer if you want to count it.
Sure.
So
I-
that'll be 4 drinks.
All right. Yes, Diana, go ahead and drink for me, and Renee, and Trevor.
All right.
And I will drink this. I'm drinking water because again, need to hydrate after the
Smart.
vaccine. So
Yeah.
we'll do that.
Yeah.
We will happily jump on that grenade for you, Ryan. Just
Oh,
saying.
I'm also drinking water according to Twitch guidelines.
Yes. According to Twitch
Probably.
guidelines.
This is just rosé colored water.
This is water that reminds me of Aviator Gin,
Mm.
the local Oregon gin company.
I just like to
Yes.
save my bottles
I
with
don't-
different things, and I fill them up with water. That's all. I do.
That-
See, I don't know about you. I'm having a milkshake.
Oh my!
I guess, does anybody have any questions?
Pikachu is a mouse?
Yeah.
Yeah, Pikachu's a
that's-
mouse.
I mean, obvious. It did have the telltale signs of some sort of rodent, so
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Raichu is definitely a rat. It's Pikachu being a mouse is debatable. I do have a question. You did hint towards it being a cycle, going back to the beginning. and going through the steps again and again and again.
Hmm.
I definitely have seen obviously multiple iterations of the game, multiple iterations of the show and movies. Is the manga and the comics something that is constantly being reinvented, or has that part of the cycle been sort of skipped over or taken away?
So my understanding was that the manga itself was and I actually don't know that area very well. I do know that the anime itself was specifically marketed towards girls, because they specifically said that. The manga is debatable because it is technically shonen anime or shonen manga, so it could, because I believe it's actually in Shonen Jump, unless I could be completely wrong or making that up. But I do remember knowing that a lot of the very popular manga is going to be in Shonen Jump.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a question from chat.
Yes.
Says, how old were you in 2000 and what's your favorite Pokemon from Gamers in Trinity?
So
Yeah,
that would
this is my favorite game. Guess how old Ryan Omega is.
Guess how old I was.
This is my favorite game.
More than 2?
So I'm gonna qualify this that in 1999 I graduated from UC Berkeley with a major in English, and that's how I ended up. And because of my rabid fandom for anime at the time, I was a major otaku at the time. I ended up getting this job doing anime merchandising, which allowed me to go to conventions on the company dime to do promotions and research, as well as go to press conferences like Nintendo. So I would have been 23.
So there is a painting in your house that you keep covered.
Basically.
We don't talk about the painting.
No, we don't. Yeah, no. There is he's an elder demon of some sort.
Yes.
there are warlocks that have pacts sworn to Ryan Omega of various kinds.
Favorite Pokemon? So that changes a lot. Oh no. It's gonna be Alakazam. Partly because Alakazam is psychic, but also that if I had to play one Pokemon and try to beat the other Pokemon with it, that was the one that was the most successful. Just like some of its psychic attacks are just so broken that I'm like, okay, I know to always fight with Alakazam. But I did do a Jigglypuff Kajinka cosplay once.
Wow.
Yes, as a 40s 1940s singer, and I actually used this as my microphone.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Where's the link? Pixar didn't have it.
The pics are in my Instagram. You can actually find it. It's still posted. It's one of my favorite cosplays because I had a very, very oversized pink zoot suit, and to represent Jigglypuff's size, and it looked really, really good. All right. It is now time for our next presentation, and I believe that next presentation is Trevor. Trevor, are you ready to share?
Yes, I'm ready to give you some. I'm gonna break your hearts is what it's gonna be.
Break my heart, Trevor. Break it hard.
Alrighty. Let's see here. Let me make this work. That should work, right? Everyone can see everything?
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect. Okay. So, Devil's Own Capitalist, Pirates and Gamblings on the High Sea. I've stated before, I'm an archaeologist by trade, so that ties into a lot of history stuff. I grew up on a boat, sailing around the world, which makes me want to love pirates. And who doesn't like just gambling for money? Right? Fun. So first, Pirates. That's the wrong photo. It's a great movie. You should definitely watch it, but not right. That's also another good movie. And Somalian pirates are a thing, and that's a whole other discussion about colonialism and neocolonialism that leads to that. Sorry, just trying to find the right pirate here. This is a bit closer. We got Pirates of the Caribbeans. They're still around. You got fast boats, automatic weapons. I've had to deal with them once or twice before, which that's a whole thing, but not quite. So next, Pirates of the Caribbean. I think we can all agree that this is the pirates that most people think of. But piracy has been around for thousands of years, as long as there's been sailing and trade on the ocean, going back to the sea people in the Mediterranean and the Greeks and the Romans. You have it in China and Japan and Korea. You have it in India. You have it all over the world for a long, long time. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. So here's the sad, sad truth about pirates. I'm going to use, we don't have a lot of archaeological records for piracy. There's some shipwrecks that we can find here and there, but it's really hard to identify any specific shipwreck with a specific pirate. The one real argument against that is there's the alleged Queen Anne's Revenge in Beaufort, North Carolina, or the Beaufort Inlet shipwreck, depending on who you're talking to. And there's a whole debate and straight up war going on between various archaeological professors about whether this ship is Blackbeard's Queen Anne Revenge or some other ship. But that just means that what we do use is historical documents and what we can get from pirate towns, like, in Jamaica and Kingstown and other places around the world. Some pirates that we do have some historic documentation about is Bartholomew Roberts, or Black Bart. We have John Phillips, Edward Lowe, and George Loafer. And for each of these, we also have their pirate codes. Everyone remembers the pirate codes from Pirates of the Caribbean. Those were not entirely made up. Pirate codes were a thing. They're just like on most ships, there's rules that you had to follow. And some of those have written documents have passed on. And for Bartholomew Roberts, Article 9 has no man shall game for money in any form, whether it be for cards, dice, crab claws, barnacles, or any other means. It was not allowed to gamble on his ships. John Phillips, Article 3, if a man shall steal anything in the company or game to the value of a piece of 8, he shall be marooned or shot. That's a bit extreme for gambling, but, pirates. Edward Lowe and George Loafer, they both worked on the same ship together, and then separated and became their own captains. And they used pretty much the exact same pirate code, with Article 5, he that is found guilty of gaming or defrauding one another to the value of a royale of plate shall suffer what punishment the captain and the majority of the company shall think fit. So the sad, sad truth is pirates did not gamble, or at least they did not gamble on board. They quite possibly gambled at the various towns where they had their booty and spent it. But gambling, even there, wasn't really a thing that they did. They understood what their life was. They liked to spend their money. They would go and they would drink and they would eat and they would hire prostitutes and they would spend their money. They did not save it. They did not gamble it. They used it. But that's not to say that there weren't real gambling things going on in their life. Market speculation. That's basically what piracy is. It is a high risk but high reward economic procedure that pirates did. They'd have to balance out whether it was risky enough to go out or not. It's a gamble, just like many people gamble today in the stocks and stuff like that. It's also why piracy still exists to this very day. That ties into the other parties. The gambles were dependent on what interest other parties had. So if shippers and insurers were not worried about piracy, they would send out ships, which meant pirates were really interested in going there. There was nothing stopping them. It was low risk. But of course, there was navies, and we have these huge sea battles that pirates did not want to go into. So that's they had to gamble and risk and really realize which way they wanted to go for that. And all of this ties into the economic disparity of the time. So really, this whole thing was a calculated risk taking, living in a situation with low life expectancy and a major discrepancy between the haves and have-nots. In reality, it's just a rational response to high risk environments and short time horizons with high stakes and highly visible prizes. This also ties into a lot of crime in general in low economic neighborhoods and countries. And that's why you have pirates that use the seas today. But I'm not going to leave you off without a bunch of the games, since this is about games. They did play games. There's plenty of games that they played. They weren't all gambling, but they played them. We have Ships, Captain, and Crew is a known game that they played, which is also known as Hazard elsewhere throughout Europe. And it's basically just craps. It's continued on to today in the form of craps. We have Tables, which is just backgammon. And Knucklebones, everyone knows that Knucklebones is rolling dice, but in actuality, Knucklebones is really a game very similar to Jacks of today, using dice, but it was a dexterity-based game primarily, just like kids nowadays with their jacks and balls. There's Pontoon, which was basically blackjack, but with dice. So you would roll dice and try to get as close to 31 as you could without going over. And then you have Game of Goose, which was a board game, very similar to Chutes and Ladders or any board game where you follow a path up to the end. The thing that almost all of the games that they played had in common was they all used dice. They didn't really use cards or paper or anything like that because they live on ships and there's a lot of water and leaks, and wet cards don't play well at all. So that's really where it goes with pirates and their gambling. And I'm sorry, but they were not gamblers. Also, they weren't really capitalists either. I would say they were definitely more socialists than capitalists. So I can put that myth down as well. It's really, this whole thing was just a lie from the very beginning for you guys. So yeah, and that is it.
I feel like I need a drink after that.
Yeah,
Regardless
what a
of
pirate.
how long it was.
What a pirate you are with your swindling.
Yep, sneaking it in.
Unbelievable. So where did all this come from then? Where did all of the cachet and clout and when you think pirates, you think liar's dice and you think a gambler's life for me and poker and all of that.
That goes into really it's propaganda and really into their democratic socialist nature as ships. It was a place for rebels to escape to. It was probably like the Wild West. It was a place where trans individuals could escape to. It was a community that took care of their own. They would have, everyone had equal shares depending on what you did. They had health insurance. If you lost an eye, which was a very common thing, eye patches were a thing, and it wasn't because they had to like see downstairs and above board and switch over, which is a myth. It was because if a cannonball hits a ship and splinters go everywhere, it's very likely to go into your eye. But you get paid for that. If you lost a hand or a leg, you get paid for that too. A lot of sailors, pirates had maid-alongs or arguably gay lovers. They had marriage ceremonies that they had, and if your mate along died on a ship, you would get their share. But that is also very, very enticing to a lot of people, and so people would make them out to be scoundrels and against God and gamblers and drinkers. And I mean, yeah, they did do a lot of drinking, and they were scoundrels. But like that whole thing was a propaganda to make them seem like villains.
Got it.
Allow people to dislike them and not have more pirates go on.
In an act of villainy, I must require you to take at least 2 drinks for your 7 minutes exchange.
I can do that in my water bottle.
Fabulous.
Ah, yes. It's a beautiful water bottle.
Mhm.
We do have a couple of questions from chat. Did pirates have backers back then? Did people fund their operations for profits?
They absolutely did. Pirates absolutely had backers back then. Not all pirates, but there was definitely a big part of piracy was the merchants. And the merchants would often back pirates and give them money on the down low, and give them supplies and sometimes information. There's actually a really good book out about just that sort of thing called Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean, which goes into the whole merchant side of it and the Jewish pirates out there in the Caribbean and how that kind of led to a whole lot of stuff.
As a member of the tribe, I need to buy that immediately.
It's a good book. As an adjacent member of the tribe, my wife is Jewish. I definitely feel the love for that.
Yeah, nobody's perfect.
I do my best.
Let's see. Any other questions?
I have a question that I know the answer to, but I just think it's fun to poke at Trevor. What's the interest with pirates and the sea, Trevor? Why is this something that you were drawn to?
It's just, it's a wild sea. It's unknown. It's a liminal space. I know people like to throw out the word liminal around, so I'll throw that in there. It makes me seem smart. No, I grew up on a boat and sailed around the world, and that's why I got into archaeology and also specifically sailing and piracy. My few interactions with actual Pirates of the Caribbean also had a tie into it, but that's how I got into it.
You mean actual pirates in the actual Caribbean? Sorry, I didn't mean that.
Actual pirates in the actual Caribbean.
Nice.
Go ahead, Tessa. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, so Trevor was a pirate.
I mean, technically, I was a pirate. I did go to East Carolina University for my master's in maritime studies, and they are the pirates.
They are.
So,
Go Pirates.
I can technically claim that.
Aren't they the purple pirates?
They're the purple and gold pirates.
Purple and gold pirates.
Yeah.
So specific.
Nice.
All right, cool. Next we have Tessa. Are you ready?
As I'll ever be.
Okay.
I can time myself, but can anyone time for me?
Sure.
That'd be great. Let me see. Can you see my screen yet? No?
It's not come up yet.
How about now?
There it is.
There we go.
All right. Before starting the time, I will make a disclaimer, which I will take a pre-shot for. Fine. This is a presentation that will not teach you how to play Sabacc. I do not have the time nor energy to teach the internet how to play extremely complicated Star Wars Space 21/Texas Hold'em and have it be accurate. But it will be informative. The end. All right, we can start now. Sabacc, poker, but make it Star Wars. Sabacc is a card game that is semi-canon. It's complicated. In Star Wars, it was first mentioned in Legends, so I guess that's not canon, but it was mentioned in a book called Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp, which is about as good as you expect a book entitled Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp to be. So, it has deep origins, but it did become canon in Solo, which technically is a one-off, so it's still kind of not canon. It's fine. We're going to explore Sabacc and all of its joys, and why it is just poker but Star Wars. The original Sabacc. In the versions of the book, pre seen in the movie and playable as sold by Disney, there was rules technically pieced together from various pieces of lore about Sabacc. And in it, there are 76 cards divided into 4 separate like suits, except really they are like sabers, coins, something else, and flasks. So that kind of shows you the rebel version of it. And they also have face cards. So there are 11 numbered cards, and then 4 ranked cards of commander, and then master, and then mistress, and then ace. But commander has a value of 12, mistress is 13, master is 14, and ace is 15 or 1. The numbered cards have 11. And then there are another 16 like major tarot face cards called the star -17. It's fine. Evil one, -15. It's fine. Moderation, which is -14. Demise, -13. Balance, -11. Endurance, -8. The
Oh,
Queen of Air and the Darkness, which I want to know who she is, which has a -2. And the Idiot, the Jar Jar Binks of all the cards, is a 0. In classical Sabacc, your goal is to get 21, but really you want to get 23 or -23 without going under or over, unless you get the Idiot's Array, which is getting a Jar Jar and then a 2 and a 3, which is technically metaphorically also 23. It makes about as much sense as that, but it's played like 21, and then sometimes gets better. The cards randomly change values in your hand. So we can't play original Sabacc. It would be really hard. They bet during this time on the pot of the general hand and also the pot of the Sabacc, which is getting a perfect 23, -23, or 023. And it is unplayable because we don't have that technology. But there is a version that is playable. In fact, we saw it played on screen. Here's a handsome gentleman playing the Corellian Spike version of Sabacc. There are many different kinds of Sabacc. In this one, the goal is to get to 0. Not 23, -23, it's fine. 0. There are a lot less cards, only 3 suits, and you can buy this set at Galaxy's Edge and learn to play it, which is why I care about Sabacc. This is something you can play in real life without a hollow card reader or interference sphere with just a set of dice. The set of dice are the things that change what card values are and what the Sabacc value needs to be. So it's both a game of extreme luck and extreme strategy, but it'd probably piss off the Imperials, which is why everybody loves Sabacc. Now, Sabacc, specifically Corellian Spike here, is how a certain someone named Han Solo, quote, fair and square, unquote, won the Millennium Falcon. He had a card up his sleeve, or somewhere worse. And he cheated. It's fine. Don't worry about it. But he got this cool ship, and that was pretty rad. Why do we care so much about Galaxy's Edge and Sabacc if it's so hard to learn, doesn't make sense, is essentially just space poker, and who would care? Besides some nerds who really want to buy $23 cards at Disneyland. Because if you're a LARPer and you go to Galaxy's Edge, you know that there are immersive actors whose entire job is to be cool guys that embody the world of Galaxy's Edge and just be characters. And if you want to do really cool stuff, you got to get in good with them. They can get you into certain seats on certain rides. They can play with you, give you missions, give you like actual physical objects, and interact with you as though a LARP if you know how to game the system. Gaming the system means getting in on their good side. To get in on their good side, you have to prove, essentially, you know vaguely amounts of lore that they can work with and are fun, which means if you really want to get in good, you learn how to play Sabacc. They know, typically, at least one of this group, how to play Sabacc, specifically Corellian Spike. So you go to Oga's Canteen, and you sit in this booth, and you don't shoot first, and you start playing Sabak. And eventually they will come, and you will have a conversation in Star Wars land about Star Wars with the Star Wars people, essentially for free. Except you need to learn how to play an extremely complicated Star Wars card game of poker and then win. And then you win at life because you get a free Star Wars LARP and everybody's paying attention to you. The end.
Woo!
Hooray!
Nice.
My.
Before we go any further,
Yay.
619. So 2 drinks.
And I count this as a double.
Fair enough.
Nice. Oh.
Water.
Now, I don't know if you know about this, or Ryan certainly knows this about me. I was a professional poker player for most of my adult life. I played professional before moving to LA. I was a professional poker player in Vegas for 6 years. Now, I've never played Sabak, and I kind of fail to see how it's similar to poker, other than it's a deck of cards. Because I don't understand. So, have you played, and what are the rounds of betting like? Is there a dealer, or are we expected to deal ourselves? Like, what's the deal?
So here's the deal
Pun
about
intended.
Sabak. Sabak, specifically Corellian Spike, ends up being a lot more like poker than I had time to explain. There are certain winning hands, specifically in Corellian Spike, because you're getting to 0, and that is much more likely when playing with the 60 card deck with a couple of face cards. And if you have like a perfect Sabak, it'd be like a pair of Sabak, like a pair of idiots. And that would be like a winning thing. But if you have the same hand that equals 2, and you have essentially like the Star Wars version of a full house, which is kind of what Han Solo pulled during the movie, after pulling out a straight in Sabak, which is also what he pulled during the movie, then it starts to get complicated.
Yeah.
You can get to 5 cards and still win Sabak with your hand. It could be like a triple and a pair, and then that surpasses the pair of like pure Sabak. But really, if you had like the star in the hand, then that powers the previous face card.
There's a cat in the background. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
No.
I need the glowing pineapple anyway to try and explain what's going on here. This is why I made a disclaimer. So yes, there are rounds of betting, there are antes, there are like pass and hit and folds and all of that jazz, but only because we made a movie where they were required to vaguely explain the rules.
Sure. I'm on board.
So, I'm curious because like you mentioned the different like I guess special cards. And it was interesting, like as you were naming them off, I was naming in my head the tarot equivalents and those values line up. So you said something like balance, and that is the equivalent of justice, which is the value of 11. And then when you said like a lady, that's 2. And in my brain, it's like, oh, that's the high priestess.
Sure.
And then so it was like really interesting as you were naming, and then like I don't know.
Can you play Sabak with a major tarot deck? Is what I think Ryan's asking.
Yeah. I feel like it's like I feel like it sounds like it originated as a tarot deck because all of the construction of what you have versus the Sabak deck is essentially tarot, like with a few variants, but essentially it's just a tarot deck, at least in my brain.
And tarot decks were originally a playing card set, and then they got divination properties through various popularization through history. So that makes a whole lot of sense. And
or was it the other way around? Where playing tarot decks originally be 52 cards and then go into playing cards.
Right. No, actually, playing cards did specifically come from this deck that ended up turning. So it kind of evolved 2 different ways. One ended up being the standard 52 card deck that we play with today, and then the other one kind of evolved into tarot.
Well, I guess it would end up. How many cards are in a tarot deck?
78.
78. 78. Okay.
78.
Well.
78.
In classical Sabak, which I guess is unplayable, so we don't get it. In Corellian Spike, you only need 60 cards. So I guess you could, in theory, or 62. Sorry, my bad. 62 cards. So in theory, you could craft one out of
Sure.
tarot deck, but in Corellian Spike, there's also way less face cards. There are mainly like 10. The green cards have like positive value, and then the red cards have negative value, and then the Sabak idiots have 0, but they're called Cylops. This is why I tried to make a disclaimer. But you should learn how to.
Can I point out also that when we say that there are a certain number of cards in playing card decks, we're talking about like a standard, maybe UK derived, I don't know, because Spanish decks of cards have 40.
Sure.
So just to put that out there.
The traditional bicycle poker deck has 52 cards.
Yeah. And then usually 1 or 2 jokers on top of that.
Fun fact, 52 cards, 52 weeks in the year. Add them all up, 364 days, 364 cards, 4 seasons. It's all sorts of weird things in that.
Numerology.
I guess one more really weird fact before I let Sabak go, as it should be. Sabak was not originally patented or trademarked by Lucasfilm. It was started out as a little like blurb in the Empire Strikes Back script that was never used, and then later became canon, but no one ever trademarked Sabak until like 2017, in which Ren Industries, named after Kyle Ron, everyone's favorite Ben Solo ripoff, emerged, and they patented / copyrighted it, and then Lucasfilm sued them, and then they did a letter of desist and cease, and then it became a huge hot mess in which the courts decided this random blurb from a script from like the 80s counted as the origin of Sabak, and they now have rights to it.
Wow.
So it wasn't always a Lucasfilm property, actually.
Wow.
Get them Disney lawyers on it.
Yep. That is a lot of lawyering. A lot.
So much lawyering.
So much lawyering. Oh my god. All right. Next, let's see. I believe it's Diana. You are up next. Are you? All right. Here we go.
On top of it.
Yes, on top of this.
Yeah, except for I couldn't find my mute button. So hello. All right, let's see here. So Bleed Out on the Brain. This one time I wrote a paper with an undergrad, and the paper and the undergrad turned out to be pretty cool. And that undergrad was Tessa Thurman. So she has co-authorship on this paper. And through the power of LARP, we actually became friends, which is ironic because it's kind of like what this whole thing is about. So first of all, I'm going to get a disclaimer because I actually kind of want to take a shot right now.
No.
And I actually did not intentionally think like I'm going to go after the Sabak one. How could I know? So this just happens to be the graphic I found via Google. So this paper was, this is me nerding out about APA style. This paper was published in Chicago Authors Date style, which is not my typical style. So just so you know, if you're inferring anything about me from the fact that I'm using that citation style, please don't. I'm an APA girl. It was important. So I'm going to start with a little story. This is me and my now friend Ryan, who lives in Canada, and we met on a ship in the middle of a lake in Michigan at Outbound Hope, which is from Quest Adventure Gaming, which Tessa is also associated with, and the LARP that we actually ended up befriending each other at after she graduated. Ryan and I were co-pilots on the board, the Ascendant Dawn, and it was a lot of struggle and strain and pain, and we trauma bonded real hard. This is us. We kind of were losing our minds in and out of character after being on the bridge for hours on end, trying to save all of the ships in the fleet. Spoilers, we did not save all the ships in the fleet. And so it was quite the emotional roller coaster, and now we're friends and we still reach out to each other over chat and are connected in part because of this in-character experience. So I wanted to start by highlighting a positive, and yeah, this is us doing therapy art that Kaza Marie had us do actually in character as her role as the therapist. I wanted to start out with a positive example because I'm going to be talking in ways that might make you think that I think bleed is a bad thing, and I don't. But what is bleed and why do we care? So bleed, especially bleed out, is when in-character dynamics spill over into out-of-character thoughts, feelings, and actions. So this spillover can be wanted and it can be undesired. So I just want to mark that. And it can have effects on LARP communities that can be both positive and negative. We build connections and social, it's the social glue that brings us all together, but it can also create residual conflict between players when those in-character dynamics are negative, hostile, competitive in bad ways. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about how this can happen on a psychological and neuroscience level, and then what we can do about that if we choose to. So I'm going to talk about the two-factor theory of emotion, which you might remember from Intro to Psych if you took it. So it's the idea that our emotional experience is not just, I had an emotion, but actually it's this underlying process of having a physical experience that we then add a label to. And so because of this two-part process, we can misfire and we can mislabel our own emotions. And some evidence for that you might actually know about are the, shout it out in the chat if you know what I'm going to talk about next, if you remember from psych class. Can you tell I'm a teacher teaching in a pandemic on Zoom all the time? Anyway, so this is actually shown in the Capilano Bridge study, also known as Love on the Bridge, by Dutton and Aaron in 1970s, where they actually talked to participants who walked across a sturdy bridge or a rickety, scary suspension bridge. And at the end of the bridge was the experimenter. And the researchers kind of had the participants do a thematic apperception test, kind of indexing what they were thinking about at the moment through how they would describe vague scenes they were looking at on these index cards, and found that the participants on the the suspension bridge were more likely to actually come up with sexual imagery in their their descriptions of the vague cards, and were more likely to call the experimenter later. And so this was taken as evidence, among other things, that we often misattribute things like physiological arousal to other things in our environment. So this can lay the groundwork for bleed to happen, where if we're experiencing strong emotions in character, those can bleed over into our feelings about the people surrounding us at the moment in that scene. And that can be great if we want it, and it can be problematic if it's uncontrolled, unconscious, and we're not attending to that. So how can that happen under the hood? So let's talk a little bit about the brain. So this is a cute picture of part of the brain. And one of the things I want to talk about is oxytocin. So this is the cuddle hormone. This is how we connect with others. We know that oxytocin is released, for example, when mothers bond with their infants, and also is associated with trust. If you pop an intranasal spray in someone's nose with oxytocin in it, they're more likely to trust others, even when they've been betrayed by them. This is economics researchers find this. So this can really harness positive feelings and connection and spill over into how we feel about those who are around us. Similarly, though, negative emotions, specifically those around rejection, which is a huge biological stressor and threat in an ancestral environment. If you are rejected, if you're ostracized, you're going to be out on your own, vulnerable to predators, not able to mate. This is a real evolutionary disadvantage. So we have co-opted these mechanisms of pain signaling to respond to social pain. My heart is broken. I feel bad about this rejection actually has a neural component. So the anterior cingulate cortex, known as the neural alarm system in the brain, will fire and basically tell us there is something bad happening and we need to attend to it. One of the things that I think is at the root of post-LARP and post-con drop is that suddenly we're surrounded by social others and suddenly you're not. Your brain is like, you've been rejected by the tribe, it's an emergency. And you go through all of this emotional turmoil. How do these affect you in the long term? Well, dopamine pathways can develop that will then foment learning. I associate this person, this space, this situation with negative or positive emotions and connection or rejection, and that doesn't care about whether you're in character or not, right? Your brain doesn't know. It's like, the human is LARPing. We're not going to encode anything right now. No, that doesn't stop. So we're going to learn about the others in our environment while we're LARPing, and we're going to transfer that learning to both in and out of character situations. So, okay, so I'm telling you that bleed is in the body. Well, bleed is in the body, it's in the brain. What could we even do about it if we didn't want bleed? And I just, again, want to remind you that some people play to have bleed, and that's okay. And I'm not making any commentary on that, as long as you're not being a dick about it. It may come up in Renee's talk, I'm not sure. I've got a hand raise on off camera and then a finger bite. I don't know what that means. But the don't be a dick rule applies here. As long as everyone's consenting and you're managing your bleed, then it's fine. But if you did want to be a little bit more conscious, a little bit more intentional, I have some ideas. And so this is where this part comes in. So what can players do? At an event, we can label, identify, and compartmentalize our experiences to the degree that is possible. And this actually, practicing this could lead to long-term benefits. So we know the people who practice consciousness, self-control can actually accrue benefits for being able to make better decisions in their real lives. For example, people who were asked to repeatedly do financial planning in a study then showed the ability to do that outside, and other types of self-control skills. But this all takes mad self-regulatory resources, which is, as we all know, a finite resource. So this is a huge model that I don't have a lot of time to explain, but the idea is that throughout the day, we engage in self-control acts that will deplete our self-regulatory pool, essentially. And that's why you reach for that snack at the end of the day. You might have a spat with your roommate because you just don't have any more reserves left to engage in self-control. Well, guess what? LARP activities F up regulatory resources real good, right? So this includes choosing stuff, regulating our emotions, switching between mindsets. Let's say code switching has been shown to do this. So we could say switching between in character and out of character a lot could drain you more. Thought suppression, so maybe suppressing that, like, oh geez, I wonder if I left the stove on when I went camping, while you're doing a big scene, that could drain resources. Self-presentation drains resources. And this, anytime you have drops in blood sugar, which we all do experience at LARP, especially a couple days on camping, let me tell you. So what can we do about that? We can try to maintain and recover our self-regulatory resources. So this can be done both by just not doing the draining activities as much and being self-selective about that. But once you've lost your self-regulatory resources, playfulness and humor can bring it back. Mindfulness, meditation. I've actually taken to bringing my meditation app to campers and going off into the woods and sitting and meditating for a little bit halfway through Saturday, because that, back when I LARPed, because that actually does help. And drinking a freaking lemonade and staying, keeping your blood sugar, your glucose levels up can actually make a difference in this, not just also not like passing out in the middle of a fight. Okay, what can players do after events? We can still do this work after events, right? And I want to give a shout out to Janaea Kemper, who has done work on autoethnography in relationship to her work on emancipatory bleed. She talks about how those who've been marginalized can use LARP in intentional ways to try to unpack the double consciousness that they experience in racist and oppressive societies. But I also think a lot of these skills could be used by every LARPer, even when they're not dealing with issues of marginalization, particularly in the LARP. Also, so this could involve bringing about ephemera, like pictured here, from the game, journaling about the game and your experiences, even taking a moment during game to journal could be a good idea, and then following up about that. And if you like those ideas, I want to give a plug to Janaea, who's a friend of, I think a friend of this stream, a friend of this Gabby Rooster for sure. And if you like these ideas, check out her work and buy her a coffee. I'll leave that up for a minute. And then I also want to talk about de-rolling and therapy. So de-rolling is an activity that we don't always do, which is where we just make a marker of moving away from in character to out of character. People have rituals to get into character, putting on a perfume, listening to a playlist, putting on your costume, but we don't always attend to the reverse. So you can listen to like Ryan Omega could listen to a Ryan Omega playlist that reminds him of who he is outside of game, and set that thing apart. People often talk about post-game showers and taking off all the makeup and taking off all the clothes as being an important piece of that ritual. So I think that's important, and we should attend to that more. And therapy. So Ryan, the other Ryan that I talked about at the beginning, who I met at Outbound Hope, actually, when we were chatting, we had just met each other through this game. I had this great experience. And he was like, I was talking to my therapist about what happened, and I wanted to talk to you a little about it. And I was like, wait, you were talking to your therapist about your LARPing. that is genius. And I'm a psych PhD and had not thought about this, but I think unpacking these experiences with a professional can really also help scaffold that. And whenever I have a chance, I'm going to give a plug to the psychologytoday.com's therapy search tool, which lets you filter and refine your search by your insurance, by what your sort of sexuality, gender is, or what you're searching for in your therapist, as well as your types of therapy you're interested in. I really recommend cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as mindfulness techniques, but you can find your own and what you think is good for you. Okay, what can designers and runners offer? So this is huge. There's so much that we could be doing as designers and LARP runners to help people to avoid unwanted bleed out. And so that includes informed consent practices, which will definitely, I'm sure, come up in Renee's talk, which allow us to opt in to bleed fostering and ego depleting activities. We need much more of that. We also need resource recovery, like out of game safe spaces that aren't just offered and then forgotten about, but that are really encouraged and looped into the LARP experience, so that people can take time to journal or to step aside from their character, as well as post-game debriefing and de-rolling that's scaffolded by the LARP runners. So this is huge and something that I've seen really done well in the convention LARP scene, but not as well in some of the other LARPs outside of that area. This can be as simple as going around in a circle and saying, like, what's one thing that happened during the LARP that you didn't expect, and what's one way in which your character is different from you out of game. And I think this can be especially important if you are LARPing with people who don't know you in real life, or who very rarely get to interact with you in out of character dynamics, because they can very easily transfer their experiences in games to thinking they know who you are as a person based on that. And that's the end. I'm sure I went over time. These are all the people that I've been, and I am all of these and I am none of these. And I think it's important to recognize that. Thank you.
None of y'all
Amazing.
saw this on stream, but I was literally nodding along like a bobblehead throughout this entire presentation. And you're absolutely right. There will be a lot of common themes that I'll be touching on mine, but yeah, this is fantastic. And it's always really fun to see how various friend groups overlap, because I actually met Janae at a LARP as well, specifically the 2017 US run of Just a Little Lovin'. So definitely, like, it's really kind of fascinating, especially when you see a lot of these, LARP academic research. It's like, wait a minute, I've been in a game with them before.
Sorry, real quick, I met Janaea before she or I were doing LARP academics in the SoCal LARP scene at Tiny Kingdoms. Yeah, so, and we were kind of like sister friends in game. Anyway.
Tiny world.
Yeah.
Very tiny world.
Very
tiny world.
Ryan and I are first cousins, effectively brothers in Twin Mask. Is how I sort of know this whole scenario.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Tessa, what's the time?
We're going to need 4 drinks out of you. So
I'm gonna refill my bottle so I could drink.
I just am drinking. I'm not waiting. The drinking game for me is I am drinking.
Ruben, my former LARP husband Trevor will drink for me. That's another tie-in.
There we go.
And Renee, so that's 3, and then I'll have my 4th and Ryan, you should definitely hydrate.
Yeah, I'm gonna hydrate. So I'll be right back. So ask questions among yourselves. I will.
I do want to touch on something that I found interesting, which is you brought up blood sugar. Now, I'm a type 1 diabetic, and whether that is related to what I'm about to say, I don't know. But it occurred to me, and this is how my brain works. It is both true that I am a type 1 diabetic, and I feel like I do not or have not experienced trauma in LARP. Are those things potentially related, or am I conflating two things in my idea based on your talk? And also, am I doing LARP wrong by nothing bad ever happens to me in LARP?
So there's a lot to unpack here,
like
Ruben. The first thing is that I'm not actually knowledgeable enough about the type 1 diabetes to know how it would relate to this. But what I can tell you is that in the studies, what they did was they showed that when people did many self-depleting tasks and then were given a lemonade versus a control condition, they were able to persist longer and do more of the other types of self-depleting tasks. So you would probably be the expert on how that would fit in with your situation, more so than me. So that's the first piece. And then the question of, are you doing LARP wrong? It's my opinion that nobody's doing LARP wrong. Everybody, as long as you are not being a dick, as long as you are engaging in proper consent, and so forth, then how you choose to LARP is how you want to LARP. That's great. I think that there's also different LARP communities that have different norms of how immersed and or emotionally intense scenes are likely to be. And so that could also be impacting your play. I know that Twin Mask is a very big community that has a lot of player directed experience rather than like very hands-on plot driven experience. That could have something to do with it. I mean, and just in general, anybody who's like interested in who's like, am I not getting the full experience? I would say try different LARPs, try different styles of LARPing, go to a con LARP, go to a campaign LARP if you haven't done that. Mix up who you play with. That's another piece. Not that I mean, I've personally RP'd with Brian and had a great experience, so I'm sure you're in great company, but maybe my other character
is a turtle person that lives in the swamp. It'll be fine.
But it may not be about like you're not playing with people who are good enough LARPers, but that your chemistry is off with the LARPers too. It's two-way street. Those are just my thoughts off the cuff.
So I have a question to throw your way.
Yes, husband.
A lot of the academic bleed and LARP articles that I've read really focus on player bleed, and there's not so much on like NPC bleed. Like I've spent a lot of time LARPing as an NPC. Most of my time has been NPCing, and most of that is you can be type shot. I play a lot of villains in that, and that's how does that kind of like roll into the bleed? Because you're playing a multiple, like you're not playing one character the entire game, but you're kind of playing a typecast, like you're playing a villain the entire time, even if it is different villains.
So I have a lot of thoughts here. Let me try to collect them. First of all, NPCs are players. NPCs are character players. And so the biggest distinction that I see is what you named, which is that they're going to be jumping in and out of roles a lot more quickly. And I do think that the sort of the neuroscience stuff that I talked about would suggest that staying in one. So first of all, that switching modes is more depleting of self-regulatory resources. So if you're a player who's coming in to play your character all weekend and you pretty much stay immersed the whole time, that's actually maybe less draining, although some of my experience suggests not, but it's gonna be less draining maybe than like switching back and forth in and out of character into different characters. And that's all theory driven. So that's one thing to hold space for. And then also, I think that the piece where you talked about getting typecast is a part of it. So we talk, I think one of the things that's relevant to bleed is how people perceive you because they're experiencing bleed about you. And so is it the case that you've experienced that a lot of people in the LARP community that you LARP with just don't trust you or kind of expect you to pull one over on them, both in and out of character? I see you smiling. So like that's going to be something that affects you psychologically because how we're received by others feeds back on how we see ourselves. So it's the looking glass self research. So that's the second piece. And then a final piece would be, yeah, I definitely think if you're playing into themes and specific emotions and relationship styles, even if the character's name is different, it's still going to have a long-term accrued effect on you.
Yeah, I actually have a really good example of how bleed can hit pretty quickly, and then with a minor calibration, it can basically be pretty easily resolved. Actually, this happened last night on Boardroom Armageddon Angels. I was initially in a scene with a character who was taking a very antagonistic take, and the character had absolutely every reason to. And the player, Tobias, I adore him. I love him to bits. But because of the way that the character was being portrayed, it was tripping some of my personal pet peeves, specifically around being interrupted. And it actually led me to basically say out of character, hey, I didn't appreciate how this went. And it was just, communicating that very clear boundary. And then, basically like the next scene was a lot lighter, so it kind of helped me decompress. And then with that further calibration, it actually made the rest of the game go a lot smoother.
So if I can piggyback off of that, I think that's a really great example. One thing I didn't bring up, but that we did apparently, Tessa, talk about in the paper, I was like reskim it because we published it a few years ago, is implementation intentions, which is a therapeutic activity that you can engage in anytime, where you kind of, and people with anxiety can overdo this for sure, but where you kind of think about a situation going into and think about a couple of things that could happen that could be problematic or beneficial, and how you'll react in those different situations. So it's kind of like a pre-simulation, and then having those implementation intentions in place means that when you do get to that moment, it takes a lot fewer self-regulatory resources on the spot to do it, because you've already run the simulation. Again, you could overdo this for sure. Huh?
Self-rehearsal.
Basically, yeah. And you could do this to death, me in the shower every day. But you can, but if you do this in like the right balance, it can really help you. So one thing I heard in that story that you told was that you kind of created a context in which you could frame the future interactions. And one thing that I could add on to that would be kind of saying, hopefully your interaction partner maybe could ask, okay, well, if this happens again, what would you like me to do? Right. And then kind of setting boundaries and also setting expectations can be a real boon.
Yeah. Fortunately, in this particular case, it was very quick. Okay, so noted, I'll tone it down. And that was exactly what needed to happen. And then like the next scene that we had together was actually really good and really fulfilling, and it drove the story along really well.
Yeah. I see a question in the chat. Is that what you're going to say, Tessa?
I have one blurb, and then I'll totally give voice to gamers in Trinity.
Cool.
My blurb is, Trevor, from somewhat of a psych experience, your revelation as to playing villain NPCs and how it might impact you shouldn't be all negative. Maybe the fact that you think of them as NPCs and maybe not as effective as PCs when it's kind of accruing on your mental self is a good thing, because you can compartmentalize like nobody's business if you're like, well, actually, that was just an NPC, and I switched between it quite fast. So I'm not sure that you want to explore that mindset or not, but maybe it's a good thing that you compartmentalize, and it protected you in some ways from a lot of mental stress and reflection. Anyway.
That's what I do. I also have resting villain face, and I get cast as villains a lot. I have a low brow and deep set eyes. I get it. It's fine. And I love playing villains. I prefer playing villains. I find them more interesting to play and easier to separate from myself.
So Renee, Tessa, and I should co-author a paper called Career NPC Villains, the Service Doms of the LARP Community.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, to be fair, I've basically said ST not only stands for storyteller, but also service top.
Sure. Wow.
Anyway, gamers in Trinity asked the question, and so we should answer it?
Yep.
Yes, we should.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Should a new LARPer choose characters like themselves or unlike themselves for the mentally safest experience?
Ooh. Great question.
Okay, so if safety is your top goal, I would probably say unlike yourself, because it'll help you compartmentalize. If you're LARPing for bleed, like I have LARPed for bleed in order to lean into parts of myself that I was missing. Like, oh, this piece of me that I've kind of lost over time as I've gotten older and professionalized, for example, I want to be more like that. And so I've made characters on purpose who are like me with a twist.
Mm-hmm.
But that would definitely encourage bleed, because that's what I'm going for. So, yeah.
I know that I've played characters that are a lot like the closer they are to me, like when bad things happen or negative experiences happen, I take it a lot more personally.
Yeah.
So
Sorry,
yeah.
I play-
something stuck in my throat.
my twin mask character is the version of me when I was a professional poker player, is how I view that character.
Oh, that
And
makes a lot of sense.
I view every social interaction as an equation, and I view every relationship I have with pluses and minuses, and that kind of version of Ruben, 26-year-old Ruben, is what I play as Sirocco.
The weird part
And
of playing
that's-
Sicarial is that Sicarial is who's like the Archduke at Twin Mask. I kind of picture him as if he were a rich white person, how would he act? And I realized so many things playing
Right.
him that enabled me to go, oh shit, that's what they think. Oh my god, and it allowed me to go into really weird spaces and kind of just
Well,
work off of privilege, but
the other thing
recognize that in
I'd
other
be-
people.
Yeah.
This
the
is so
other
good.
thing the other thing that I would like be interested in, especially with characters like Sicarial is literally a 10-year-old character, so I would be interested in hearing a talk about how you play characters that last that long, because I don't think LARP characters are supposed to really last for 10 years, individual characters, right?
Mhm.
The lifespan of a LARP character seems like it's shorter than 10 years, right? Like that's way older. And so how to go about trying to maintain your relationship with your character, I guess.
And
well,
that
we know that
Mm.
actors who play a role for too long start to get effectively bleed, and that can lead to psychological issues, especially if they're using more immersive techniques like method acting.
mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for me, like the weird part is I never set out to play a character that long. What ended up happening was there were just lots of transitions, like over time. Like he became, people asked him to be in charge. People asked him to be a counselor. People asked him to heal. And in the last few years, I was like, okay, I think I'm done with Sicarial. And then he ended up having a family, and that ended up changing the type of role play that I had. So there were just different things to do. If he left, if he were murdered, like next game, I will be sad for a few days, but I will be very happy that I had the 10 years that I had. But I'm also not looking for an end, just more like a when it's time, it's time. And that's kind of where I am with him. We have ended up with a really strange silence, so I think we need to.
I was just waiting for the
I was sorry. I was looking at the chat and Tessa pulling a slick one on all of us. Super Rat Lord basically said, "Show me the GPS coordinates of the lie."
oh no, what are these GPS
Specifically-
coordinates?
Oh,
The
why did you
GPS
bring this up?
coordinates put in there. Google them. Just Google them.
Oh, amazing.
Okay, I have to look.
Yeah.
I have to look this up.
Excellent.
You
Good
do-
good
you
Easter
really
egg.
do. You do.
Both funny and well executed.
Anyway, Ruben, it's your turn, right?
It
is
your turn.
Like being introduced.
Oh my god!
Hi everyone. It's the internet's Ruben Bressler, and I'm ready to share a thing. Can you see the thing?
No. Oh,
Yeah.
now yes, now we
See
can.
the thing now.
Okay, I
Yeah,
gotta-
now we
I'm
can.
trying to hit the play button. There we go. So, a little background on me. My name's Ruben Bressler. I've been playing Magic the Gathering for 22 years. I've been making Magic the Gathering content for the internet on YouTube and written articles for the last 15 years. I currently am the co-host of a popular Magic the Gathering news talk show called Magic Mics. That's MICS. And I'm also the dungeon master for the Broken Pact, which is the flagship Dungeons and Dragons Magic the Gathering crossover D&D live play series for D&D. I know a lot about Magic. And this is going to be about a very specific part of Magic, which is how it's managed to survive. Not about gameplay mechanics, not about the art, not about the famous professional players from over the years. All of those things I could do other talks on. I could talk about Magic until the cows come home. We're going to talk about the economy of the game. This picture that you see right here was taken yesterday by someone that I follow on Twitter to ensure the safety of our guests and team members, effective on May 14th. That's in like 2 days. MLB, NFL, NBA, and Pokemon trading cards will no longer be sold in, this is a Target, until further notice. You see what's still on the shelves? Magic the Gathering, because Magic has established a safe, economic, stable bubble. How have they managed to do that for almost 30 years? Well, I'm going to tell you. Everyone dreams of catching an economic wave at just the right time, right? Everybody, when a product or a commodity goes from popular to way too popular too fast, though, it creates what's called a bubble. And it's the way of bubbles to burst. The housing crash of the mid 2000s was the most recent large example, but perhaps there's no industry more prone to bubbles than the collectibles market. From comic books and Beanie Babies in recent memory to tulips and religious relics in ages past, history has had its fair share of collectible fad bubbles that subsequently burst. But the company that creates the popular trading card game Magic the Gathering avoided that. They avoided a bubble and an economic crash for about 30 years now, almost 30 years, thanks to a lot of reasons: savvy business practices, some pretty unpopular ideas, but ultimately profitable ones, and long-term gambles and a lot of luck. But before we get to that, some of you might not know what Magic is. So let me briefly recap Magic. Magic the Gathering is a game that was initially created by game designer Richard Garfield, who has gone on to make a bunch of games from Artifact to King of Tokyo, and of course is probably best known for Magic the Gathering.
Oh no.
What happened?
Oh, sorry. I thought you. We didn't hear.
Cut out for a second.
You cut out for a second. We thought you froze.
My
Repeat the last
internet
sentence.
is my internet's unstable, apparently.
Okay. Repeat the
Magic
last sentence you said.
Sure. Magic the Gathering was created by Richard Garfield, who was a student at Carnegie Mellon in the early 90s when he created it. And it was really the first trading card game, which mixed the aesthetics of high fantasy games like D&D with the collectible nature of baseball cards, and also the traditional card and token games like dominoes and Scrabble, chess, poker, things like that. Wizards of the Coast was a company that had a president named Peter Adkinson, who very quickly saw the potential of Magic and agreed to start production in earnest. The product premiered publicly at Gen Con in 1993, and 3 months later, in October, they'd already sold out of the 10 million cards that they'd printed in the initial print run. It had already begun to ascend in popularity basically immediately. Over the next several years, Magic blossomed from a fun game that a lot of people enjoyed to a fad that a ton of people enjoyed. By 1996, there was a Pro Tour, the Professional Magic the Gathering Pro Tour, and coverage was briefly on ESPN2 for a time, which you see the graphics for in the lower right there. By 1997, 2 billion cards had been sold. In 1999, Wizards of the Coast was acquired by Hasbro for $325 million, making Magic a Hasbro game. Over the last several quarterly reports, Magic has been the highest performing game that Hasbro has and highest performing IP that Hasbro has, including things like Monopoly and Transformers. Magic was a fad in the early 90s. It had captured the attention and imagination of kids and adults alike, and secondary resellers were beginning to take notice. If you remember those first 10 million cards, those cards went from fun game pieces to collector's items immediately, and the prices began to skyrocket. The speculators, not just the collectors, people from outside of the hobby came calling. Magic was popular, which was good, but a central tenet of the game was its tradability and its collectability. Pieces of Magic come in what are called packs, like baseball cards, and some cards are rarer than others. And once the speculators joined in, it wasn't just trade and barter anymore, it was buying and selling and auctioning of those cards. And often that alone leads to a bubble and then a crash. All you have to do is look at the Beanie Baby market to see that in very clear, stark terms. Everyone thought that Magic would go the same way, that it was just another tulip market, that it would pop, except for that the folks at Wizards of the Coast avoided that. And they very carefully and specifically crafted a way to make a collectible that could survive their initial popularity. One advantage that Magic had was that everyone who made Magic at the time, and this is still true to this day, are basically math geniuses, every single one of them. Richard Garfield, I mentioned, went to Carnegie Mellon. He was a applied mathematics student at the time. And most of the people that play tested the early game, that's him in the far left, were all applied mathematicians. Scaff Elias, who's making that weird crazy eye in the upper center, another crazy mathematician kind of brain. Those early employees saw the economic bubble coming, and they actually did intense research into economic bubbles and how they burst. And their estimates put Magic's lifespan at about 2 years if they stayed the course in the way that they had at the time. But they decided that that's not what they wanted. They could make heaps, they could make millions and millions and millions of dollars, and then at the end of the 2 years, the ride would be over. But they wanted the game to not grow too fast or too slow. So what did they do? First, they had to bring the price of cards back down to reasonable levels. And so they printed a ton of cards from new sets, new game pieces, which not necessarily flooded the market, but definitely was a flood compared to what it had before. And they would go out to game stores and they would see if the local game stores were selling those packs for how much they wanted them to be sold for, which was about $3. If the local game store was selling packs for $6, they told the printing presses to print more cards until the prices came back down to the number that they were comfortable with. And these cards were all primarily different than the earlier ones. This, they deduced, would at least keep the speculators away from the newest cards. And that deflated the bubble. But you still have the problem of those old cards and some outside speculators. Fortunately, they had a plan for that too. You see, what they did was they made the older cards unplayable in certain what are called formats, versions of the game. And the way that they made versions of the game was that they said, all right, this version of the game is going to be only cards printed in the last 2 years. This one will be 4 years. This one will be all cards from all time. How do we make the most recent version the most popular? Well, you create a tournament series. Magic introduced formats to their tournaments. Those super expensive, super old cards would remain super expensive and super old, but they would no longer be played in the upper echelons of competitive play, meaning that top tier tournaments were no longer as cost prohibitive. This is why the pro scene and the ESPN2 coverage, as a result, was so important. It showcased that the best in the world, and make no mistake about it, professional Magic the Gathering players are some of the brightest mathematical and strategic minds on the planet. But more importantly, they were using game pieces that the average person at home could easily and cheaply replicate, relatively cheaply. Now, they did reprint a lot of cards, of these old cards, with new versions. And the way that they did this, primarily, and they did this a number of times, but primarily with a set that was called Chronicles, backfired spectacularly and very nearly ended the game in 95-96. Without going into too many specifics, it did so that was similar in a manner to how Silver and Golden Age comics bottomed out. When you reprint exact copies and flood the market with exact copies of things, you don't raise the new value of things. You instead decrease the value of the old things and erode customer confidence in your product. And that deflates, instead of popping the bubble, it just deflates the bubble way too fast. So the rare cards went from rare to not so rare, and hundreds of dollars of cards became nearly worthless kind of overnight. And the collectors weren't happy with these changes because you still want to have collectors in your collectible card game, along with the players and the fans. So, in addition to creating a few new ways to play those specific cards, they put some protections in place for the collectors. Specifically, they created something called the reserved list. This was a promise made by Wizards of the Coast. They would not reprint new versions of a certain subset of old cards so that those very oldest collections wouldn't suddenly bottom out overnight like Golden Age comics. The collectors, the players, the speculators, and the hobbyists kind of found a happy middle ground with the company that made the product. And the bubble, to this day, remains unburst. But the fight isn't over, and it never really will be. Magic, as you can see here, is constantly under siege from people talking about the reserved list more than 20 years after it was created, with a lot of consternation. There is something called promissory estoppel that is constantly brought up and is a complicated legal jargon word that basically is they promised to keep the value. So if they go back on that promise, can we sue them for promissory estoppel for the lost value? And I mean, Hasbro lawyers don't really want to deal with it. And so abolishing the reserved list is not really, I mean, it's talked about, but it's not really ever seriously entertained, but it's constantly talked about in, you know, the equivalent of campfires, around the equivalent of campfires. Because those old cards, by the way, are now worth literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases. You see this card in the middle, it's called a Black Lotus. There's a recent report that suggests that the rapper Post Malone purchased a graded 9.5 mint condition Black Lotus for about $310,000 earlier this year. Yeah.
Damn.
I believe it.
Additionally, Hasbro has become considerably more invested in Magic over the last 5 years or so. There's a recent slew of products called a Secret Lair, and one of them in particular crossed a line that was thought uncrossable. They printed mechanically unique Magic cards using IPs that were not owned by Wizards of the Coast. This particular one was called the Secret Lair The Walking Dead in partnership with the iconic AMC show. And while the product itself was a huge hit, it made a ton of money and is by far the most popular Secret Lair drop. They in doing so, in printing mechanically unique Rick and Glenn and Lucille cards, many people think that that's a bridge too far. And a lot of people have said that that will be, it's bringing on the end of Magic. That it is a short-term money grab from Hasbro, not from Wizards, from Hasbro, that will ultimately cost them in the long view. So while Magic's overall bubble is in no danger of popping, there are certainly portions of the game that are still worrisome. Over its lifespan, Magic has been criticized for its decisions basically constantly, with many players leaving the game over economic, game design, and other decisions. In 1995, people thought that Magic would die a quick death because that's how fads work. Then they thought it would die again in 1999 with the reserved list, and again in 2004 with another issue, and 2012 with another issue, and so on. But perhaps better than any other fad in the history of collectibles, Magic the Gathering's created an internal economy and self-regulating system that's made it so that their bubble hasn't burst for nearly 30 years.
Wow.
Wow.
Boom.
Can we
Nice.
get like the housing market like in on some of these strats? Just saying.
Oh.
Okay. So quick. The time ended up being like 14:45. So that'll be 3, 6, 9, 12, 4.
Yeah, I hope I didn't drone on too long.
It's okay. It was so informative. It was fascinating.
It's an area of I've been playing Magic Gathering for a long time since Revised, which is the third set that ever came out. So that
1994.
yeah, 94. And so like listening to that and wondering how it's been around so long, it's like no one delves into that. So like this is amazing.
Yeah, like it's honestly really fascinating because economics is a heavily talked about conversation in a lot of different role playing games, especially in just general in every collectible card game. I actually used to play L5R competitively when I was in my early 20s, and I remember going to those. I remember going to a lot of those tournaments and whatnot, and doing some really aggressive trading That was actually where I honed some of my negotiation skills in real life.
Yeah.
And then also for the things that I couldn't trade for, I was like paying $30 a pop for these cards, just that were like the cream of the crop that would make my deck even viable.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Magic is not the only trading card game that has existed or has had bubbles. L5R is a great example. The Pokemon trading card game is receiving a resurgence, thanks Logan Paul. There was the Versus system fad for a while. I mean, the World of Warcraft trading card game, but yeah, Magic put in very specific, diligent, hard work to have a longer lifespan.
Yeah, and you can see other CCG companies basically kind of following in those footsteps. Another L5R example were the Soul of cards, which are basically mechanically identical to older cards that were printed, which allowed people to use their older cards, but had new artwork and had a new character in the storyline. And I think that's part of, I think that may have also helped keep people involved in the game with edition over edition over edition. I don't think they had a reserved list. But I do know that there are some that were specifically not legal for tournaments.
Yeah.
But they were, if it was like an open format, you could absolutely use it. And those were the way overpowered cards if you want the game to go completely gonzo.
It's interesting that Magic itself, like I have like a commander deck, right? Several commander decks, and they compose of cards that come from Reserve to cards that come from the most recent Strixhaven, right?
Yeah.
And it's surreal that a format can incorporate all of that, and even though there's such a thing as power creep, like it resists that because of the way it's formatted, and that is insane. Like I don't know who else does this.
Yeah, the complexity of Magic makes it unique. There are over 20,000 unique individual Magic cards, not counting printings of those versions.
I was actually about to ask if you had that number off the top of your head.
Yeah, it's about 20,000. And it's getting more and more percentage-wise every year. Magic is printing, I think that 2020, about 5% of all mechanically unique Magic cards were printed, which in a that's a 1 in 20 number, but Magic's been around for almost 30 years. So they're printing about twice as many mechanically unique cards now as they were even 6-7 years ago, which, I mean, is that sustainable? Who knows? But Magic's more popular than it's ever been. There's like 30 million people that play Magic worldwide today. It's more popular than it's ever been.
Yeah, and while you have the base format of the game, there's also adding additional mechanics that make that continuing uniqueness and freshness of the game continually viable.
That leads to my question though, which is, and sorry if you mentioned this, I was working out like what I was going to have for dinner, Thai food or Indian food. But did you talk about how the pandemic has affected play, since a lot of it, from my vantage point as a non-Magic aficionado, centers on meeting in person at game stores and doing that?
So it's very interesting what's happened to Magic during the pandemic. It kind of breaks down into 3 parts. One is Magic hasn't really suffered in terms of sales. People are still buying Magic cards, and really everything collectible has gone crazy in the last 16 months. Pokemon cards and Magic cards, bobbleheads and Funko Pops, comic books, everything has gone nuts. Like if it's a collectible, it's probably worth 4 times as much as it was 16 months ago. And so from that standpoint, Magic is surviving very well. There's also a new user interface for Magic that's been created in the last 2 years called Magic Arena, which makes it very pretty to play Magic on the internet with digital cards, digital objects. And there has long been something called Magic Online, but it's not pretty and it's a little bit different. The user interface for Magic Arena looks a lot more like popular other card games like Hearthstone. It's very pretty. There's lots of like bells and whistles and sound effects and things like that. So it's much more palatable, feels more like an esport. And Magic, so there was a sea change in control over the people who run Magic about 4 years ago. Chris Cox is now the CEO of Wizards of the Coast. He came from Leapfrog, and used to work at Microsoft. Previous to that, it was like Peter Atkinson and like gamer guys, right? So you bring in someone who's not a gamer person, and they come in with a whole different set of priorities, like what makes the most money now, as opposed to how do we sustain the game forever. So you're seeing a lot more decisions like the secret lair. You're seeing a lot more decisions of how much can we turn the faucet on before the handle breaks off, and we haven't reached that point yet.
A really quick question. The Magic Online experience, is that something where you register the cards you actually have physically and can only play with those, or is it separate?
It's separate, entirely separate. So Magic, there's no real way right now where like you open up a pack and have a code. Sometimes they'll do bonuses like that, where it's like, oh, you played in this in-store event, we'll give you a code to draft online for free. But there isn't a one-to-one collection, right? If I have a foil, whatever, a shiny whatever in real life, I don't necessarily have that online.
One of the things that surprised me when just hearing from someone who did work for Wizards of the Coast is that while people have traditional love and nostalgia for Dungeons and Dragons, um, Magic the Gathering makes 25 times the amount of Dungeons and Dragons,
yeah.
and is
Absolutely.
what sustains most of that company.
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, D&D, more people play D&D, but you don't need anything to play D&D.
Mm-hmm.
You need cards to
You
play
need
Magic.
cards.
You can buy dice wherever. You can make up your characters wherever. You can, write numbers down wherever. You don't need to buy your pencils from Wizards of the Coast for your Dungeons and Dragons characters.
There's also a big proliferation of other tabletop games with other books from the other companies profit on, whereas it's not really the same thing with Magic the Gathering having direct competitors in the market for what they're doing that I'm aware of. Pokemon trading cards, I guess, like you said.
Yeah. So, but that also covers a different audience. That said, there are some questions in the chat we should take a look at. Specifically, Gamers in Trinity asked, "Do you know what the most valuable Magic card you own is?"
I have quit and bought back into Magic so many times that I don't really own much of anything anymore. The most expensive card I own is I think I have a foil French Replenish somewhere in my stuff. That's probably like a $1,300 Magic card. Somewhere in my room. I don't even know where it is right now. If I could even sell it, like the audience of who wants to buy that is super, super low. I personally I don't really collect anymore. That's just my personal thing. Actually, one of the better things I have is actually up here on a shelf. I'm going to grab it real quick.
I just went and grabbed mine, which is in a case for a very good reason.
Oh, is that beta or alpha?
This beta.
Yeah.
What card is that for those of us who can't see?
That is Demonic Tutor.
Yeah, Demonic Tutor, which is like it is not like you do see like reprints like every so often of this card, sure. But this one happened to be a beta. I'm assuming it from just the standard formatting because the alpha cards are also just a slightly different card format. And I know the last value and this is like really good condition. I think the last value for this was 1,500 for that card.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
You could probably get an ungraded medium condition, not even medium, like kind of bad condition with scuff marks for about $600.
Yep.
Yours, if it was graded and in good shape, is going to be, worth more than that.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is Ryan should potentially sell that and buy himself an entirely new rig for streaming.
If you want to.
I already invested quite a bit in streaming, so I'm good.
That's fair.
Magic the Gathering cards have outperformed the stock market every year since it's been invented. So
I'm unsurprised. So another question from Gamers in Trinity: what was your favorite set?
Personally, the first set that I learned with, I just drank an entire bottle of water. The first set that I played with seriously was Urza's Legacy, which came out in 1999, I think, and I was like
Mm,
12 years old.
I love the Urza
Um,
sets.
I love the Urza sets, and
They're
Urza's
so
Legacy
good.
was my introduction into Magic. It's how I like joined. I learned about 3 weeks before that set came out, and so then when I started going to comic book stores and started learning Magic, that was the big hype set, and so that's it's my equivalent of my favorite band from freshman year of high school or whatever is Urza's Legacy.
Mhm. Let me see. Mine was Mercadian Masks. Um, it's like in terms of mechanics, like I liked a lot of the mechanics if it were isolated by itself, but would be considered very broken in many other things.
Yeah.
People say it's one of the worst, one of the poorly. It's a very poorly designed mechanics game
Yeah.
set. However, it's also beautiful, and I think it was the first time they actually started to really one of the first places where they started to really tell a story, and I started to actually pay attention to the cards for the
Mhm.
story rather than
Yeah.
just characters. So that's
I could
what
do a whole
caught me
nother talk on how Magic wouldn't succeed without the
without storylines.
incredible amount of money
Lord.
and energy they've put into the story.
I was
Not even
so
the art, but like even just the story.
I was so happy when they came out with I'm gonna kick myself. Is it Nico? The first
Nico
visibly non
Ares, yes.
Nico R is the first visibly non-binary character in Magic.
Non-binary, so Planeswalker.
Mm,
There are characters in Magic that can travel between worlds, and this is the first of those characters to be a non-binary identifying Planeswalker. There have been NB characters in the past, but this is the first time that they've been sort of given that kind of story spotlight
right. And like with
in
special
a
art
recent set.
and and a lot of prominence. Like you buy the booster pack, and Nico's like figure is literally on it.
Right.
So really, really cool.
Okay. All right. So Sage
It-
asks, what are your thoughts on Magic the Gathering riffing off of various media? Their specific example is how War of the Spark is basically Infinity War.
Oh, well, I mean, I think that's so there's something interesting that happens with Magic where I don't think that Magic copies popular culture, but it reflects popular culture. Specifically, Magic sets are made 2 years before they come out. So War of the Spark was made 2 years before Infinity War came out. So it's not like they saw Infinity War and were like, "Ooh, that's popular. Let's make an Infinity War Magic set." Right? It just they sort of rhyme. And I've also think it's kind of funny that a lot of D&D books and Magic sets, since they're made by the same company, like kind of are mirror images of each other. Like they came out with a werewolf and vampire set the same year that Curse of Strahd came out. Like they just made a Norse-inspired icy place when Icewind Dale book just came out. That always happens with Magic and D&D, and oftentimes will happen with Magic sets in popular culture. Not always. I mean, there is a Magic College set right now that is coming out when there's no, Harry Potter book or whatever. So, it's hit or miss.
We're forgetting about the Andrew Ruse Magic College stories that are gaining mass popularity right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the current set, which is called Strixhaven, does not share a ton of similarities with Hogwarts in terms of other Magic colleges that you could compare it to, but it's the one that's most people are familiar with.
For sure. And if there's one more in the chat from Sage Access. Favorite meme card?
Favorite meme card?
Yeah.
Chubtoad.
Ruben will not be taking questions at this time.
No context. Yeah, as long as there's no follow-up questions. Chubtoad.
All right. I think we are at our final presenter. Renee, are you ready?
Well, as ready as I'm ever gonna be. All right,
right.
let me go ahead and set here. So content warning. Yes, I'm going to take a drink for this.
You technically don't have to since it's trigger warning, but it's okay.
That's okay. I'm drinking anyway because it's the end of the evening and I got a refill for this specific reason. This presentation includes frank discussion of sexuality and inflicting pain in the sexual context. If that's not for you, that's okay. This is your opportunity to use your safe word and step away. So today I'm going to be talking about everything I learned about being a good role player. I learned from BDSM. This is who I am all over social media. No, I do not have an OnlyFans, and no, I don't plan on making one. Oh. A little bit more about me. I have been a gamer for various stripes for about 20 years. I actually started out specifically in Vampire LARPs. I have been a Kickster for 13 years. I picked that up after college. And I am kind of all over the internet, specifically with Boredom Armageddon Angels, Purgatory Cafe, my own stream, Craft Services with Hedgie Cleric. It's a cute little artwork here. And then coming soon, I'm going to be a guest GM with Geek Therapeutics, which is a program where that teaches therapists how to basically be game masters and use role-playing games for therapy. Now, we frequently say, game is not therapy, but in the hands of a licensed therapist, it absolutely can be. So, a lot of people who are coming into this may not necessarily be familiar with BDSM. So it's an overlapping abbreviation. So you've got basically 3 different pairings here: bondage and dominance, bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, and sadism and masochism. I think the drinks are kicking in. So BDSM, as we know it, primarily deals with pain in a pleasurable and frequently sexual context. Pain for pleasure has existed since the ancient world. There are references specifically in Mesopotamia, specifically with the worship of the goddess Inanna or Ishtar, depending on who you ask. And then obviously we have examples specifically from there's specifically a tomb with the Etruscans called the Tomb of the Whipping, specifically with this particular artwork. And thankfully, wear and tear over the years has provided an opportunity for there to be some nice censoring so we don't get in trouble with Twitch. Now, pain in a pleasurable context started to get a little bit more attention, specifically in the 18th and 19th centuries, primarily through literature. John Cleland, who is the author of Fanny Hill, was one of the first more broadly published depictions of a sexual flagellation scene where the partners involved were consenting. And then, of course, there's the Marquis de Sade, who is specifically known for biting social commentary, usually paired with sexual violence. And then we get into Leopold Ritter von Sacher-Masoch, who is the namesake for masochism. He wrote the novella, Venus in Furs, which specifically covers the context of a man submitting to a woman in a sexual context, and also kind of more of a master-slave agreement. As that evolved through the 20th century, a lot of what we know for fetish fashion actually started out in burlesque, specifically in the 20s and 30s. And then after World War II, biker culture gave rise to gay leather culture. And then we have Betty Page, and I spelled her name wrong, forgive me. Specifically, her fetish model opportunities really kind of brought forward the idea of fetishes and what we now know as BDSM into, one might argue, a little bit more mainstream. Today, a lot more of what BDSM means and what that looks like is codified a bit more because of the internet, through various listservs and forums and chat rooms. A lot of these pocketed communities of people of like-minded interests came together and they started talking, as folks in subcultures often do. And it led to even more broader acceptance. Leather Pride actively marching in the San Francisco Pride Parade. And of course, everyone's favorite kink novel to hate, 50 Shades of Grey. Now, how does that play into role-playing? Role-playing is a common fetish. Specifically, the good old-fashioned chestnut, I put on my robe and wizard hat. If we want to go into the old meme culture. And at least from an anecdotal perspective, the playerable anecdote is not data. There's a heavy overlap between RPG enthusiasts, whether it's tabletop, LARP, what have you, and kink, specifically because of the opportunity for additional role play. There may be a correlation between that and various mental health conditions, but the research is not my forte, so I'm not going to dive into that today. But people go into kink and role-playing games for a lot of the same reasons. They're looking for escapism. They're looking for catharsis by experiencing emotions that they don't normally experience in their everyday life. Extreme emotions, specifically joy, fear, sadness, by kind of stepping into a persona that is not necessarily them. Dr. Leonard went into this in depth in her presentation earlier, and I'm actually rather grateful for it because it meant that I didn't have to go into it in depth. Both these activities engage in pleasure centers, usually in different ways, sometimes more intense and sometimes in very different areas. And if not done safely, can cause more pain than intended. And Tessa, I catch you with your holodeck reference there. Yes. Anybody who's going into those holodecks for a role play thing is absolutely a LARPer. I will not be taking questions on that at this time.
No.
So the key elements to both that will make these both pleasant experiences involves a few common elements. Jackalope LARP Studios actually laid this out very, very well. Specifically, I love this structure, and I came across it with the night in question when I first attended back in 2018. That was collaborative, consensual, and safe. BDSM, by its very nature, has to be collaborative. All parties have a say in what goes on. Role play is the same way, but while I would say less of an imperative for different safety reasons, it should absolutely still be happening. And obviously, consent. BDSM must be consensual. Otherwise, it's illegal in a lot of places. In Austria, it's actually legal to receive pain or inflict pain specifically on consenting subjects. That is not always the case pretty much anywhere else in the world. Role-playing, by its very nature, is heavily consensual. You, at your table or at your LARP, are gathering with a lot of people, or a small group even, specifically to engage in an activity together, to tell a story, to play these characters. So naturally, you have to work together to make that happen. If y'all are just doing your thing in tandem, it's no fun for anyone. At that point, you're just playing with yourself in front of your friends, and that is a completely different fetish. And naturally, BDSM must be safe, or at least risk aware. There are a lot of things that you can do depending on what kind of activities you're going to be going into, specifically to mitigate harm, or in some cases, eliminate it entirely. There are certain rope ties that are less constrictive, but still have the restraining effect that you want. You can use lighter strikes than you normally would if you were using a particular item as a weapon, as opposed to something specifically to create a sensation. And role playing must also be safe for a whole host of mental and emotional reasons that have actually already been covered in this program. The brain doesn't always know the difference between what's happening in a fantasy, whether it's a sexual one or a gaming one, versus what's happening in real life. As you put yourself through these experiences, the animal part of your brain doesn't know the difference. And so it can trigger those fight or flight responses that, even though you know academically that you are in a safe place, your brain is freaking out. And that can lead to panic responses, negative bleed, and a whole host of other issues. I know how to scroll, I promise. Signs of a good role player in this particular context. And yes, the picture choice was intentional because, quite frankly, Ryan is a fantastic example in this regard. A good role player buys into storylines, whether it's something that's coming from the GM staff or the DM staff, if you know what I mean, or the ST staff, the service staffs. But they're buying into the stories that are being told, whether it's general plot, other characters' personal stories, their own stories. They invest and they make everyone around them feel like that story is special. They provide avenues for collaboration. They give people an in to get involved and to be more inclusive with the community. They respect the people they're playing with. If they set a boundary, a good role player acknowledges that boundary and make sure not to cross it if they know about it ahead of time, or if they trip over it, they scale back so they know not to hit it again. When they know their boundaries, they communicate them safely to ensure their own mental health. And not only that, they promote strong emotional responses, but within that structure, within those clearly delineated boundaries between what they know they can handle, what they know the players involved can handle, but they provide ways to create that healthy, extreme emotional experience. Looks similar, doesn't it? As far as the various steps for Signs for a Good Kingster. And this doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what side of the flogger you are on this. This could be a top, it could be a bottom, be somewhere in between. Personally, I am a gender fluid pansexual polyamorous switch, which means I can't make a decision on anything now, can I? Nah, I can. But a good kingster, no matter where they are, they buy into the experience, whether it's their own or the person or people they're in a scene with. So a good top basically feeds into the experience to make the person that they're topping feel good. They create that immersive environment. A bottom, not only while they're enjoying the experience, they're providing reactions and feedback specifically so that the top will know that something is going well or maybe not so well. And for the top, hearing that from the bottom is a pleasing experience. Good Kingster provides avenues for collaboration with others. Sometimes you want an audience. Sometimes you want participants, aside from just the people that you've already talked to. But usually everybody in a scene has at least had a conversation ahead of time, specifically to delineate what is and is not okay. Good Kingster respects the people in the scene with them. Because otherwise, well, we run into that whole legal issue. And communicate boundaries clearly to ensure their own safety. I mean, we talk about sub drop all the time. There's top drop too. As Little Ribbit in the chat has specifically been saying, think of yourself like a high performance car and use your freaking indicator lights. And as Super Lattler has pointed out, communication helps avoid a trauma response when a boundary is tripped over. Communicate those boundaries, helps keep you safe. And of course, promotes a strong emotional response within clearly delineated boundaries. Sometimes that's a highly pleasurable response. Sometimes you're left sobbing in a heap at the end, and that's okay. Kind of reminds me of my experience at the end of Justice 11, and there was no floggers involved. I'm not drunk yet, promise. So, elements that are common in both BDSM and role playing: scene negotiation and warming up. This is absolutely important. You don't want to go in cold. You don't want to go in dry. You discuss what you want out of a scene, what is and is not okay. And especially in a free-form environment, you have those consent conversations. Or if you're in a tabletop environment, like a session 0, so kind of get everybody to have a feel for who's okay with what at the table, what kind of story elements you want. And then, of course, there's, safety mechanics. The X card by John Stephanopoulos is an excellent example, which is basically the same as calling red in a scene if you're using a stoplight, or calling your safe word. Basically, you put it down, and no questions asked, whatever is happening stops. And whatever caused that to be triggered, whether it's the safe word or the X card in this particular case, it doesn't happen again. Note the similarity in language. It comes from theater and literature. There's a very good reason why you call it a scene in BDSM and a scene in role-playing as well. Inflicting consensual pain. For BDSM, could be physical or emotional, depending on the context and what's been negotiated. And with role-playing, well, you just get punched in the feels a whole lot. Great example from this last night was actually from PJ McGaw as Barakiel, with this beautiful monologue about an old dog who just wants to sit down, just wants to lay down and rest, and he's done. I was in tears, but I also said at the beginning of that scene during the break, "Fuck me up, fam." So he knew that that was an okay step to take, at least with me. And of course, these cause a lot of happy chemicals and a lot of not so happy chemicals to rush into your brain. Adrenaline, dopamine, oxytocin. I could really go into this a whole lot longer, but quite frankly, Dr. Leonard did it way better than I ever possibly could. There is absolutely a rush when you're experiencing a good scene. And then there's the drop afterwards as all those chemicals start to recede. And after that, it's a good idea to take care of yourself. Hydrate, eat, spend time with your friends. Talk yourself down out of that experience. D-roll, do afters, do what you need to do to come down from that. And sometimes, I know at least for me, especially in a very immersive weekend LARP, sometimes that involves me getting into a hedgehog kigurumi and curling up in a pile of pillows. And I do the same after a BDSM scene too. And now for some real life examples. Collaborative LARP safety mechanics using the stoplight system, which is basically if you want somebody to continue doing what they're doing, say green. If you want them to continue but ease off on the intensity, you just say yellow. Or if you want it to stop, you say red. These are a universally acknowledged, at least in the United States, set of safe words in the BDSM scene. And I've seen this happen in a lot of consent-based LARPs just here in the US. Another great example is game runners sending their staff members specifically to dungeon monitor training at BDSM clubs, specifically so they know what to look for player safety, because it's a lot of similar aspects, especially when you're dealing with a lot of topics that are going to be a bit more extreme than others. And then my own personal experience comes from both as a player, where I negotiated with a player ahead of time about a particular outcome involving a character's parent. We talked about what was okay, what was not okay. And while the scene took place online, the player and I were pretty much just in like one room apart because it was my housemate. And afterwards, after the scene was concluded, we came back from our separate rooms and we sat together, we had a cuddle, and we had a drink. And that helped a lot, specifically from the kind of coming down emotionally from that scene. And as a GM, I ran a scene involving a larger temple environment where a player came to me and said that they wanted to send their character off to their death in a truly epic fashion. And so I made that particular character the sacrifice to consecrate that temple. And with everybody's buy-in, we had about 12 players involved, specifically in the effective murder and devouring of this character. I clearly set up what was and was not okay ahead of time, and everybody bought in. And the player came back to me and said that that was one of the most fulfilling roleplay scenes that he had ever had in his life. So really, what it boils down to, whether you're in the bedroom, in the play space, in the LARP camp, or around your table, communicate clear with the people you're collaborating with. Know your boundaries and enforce them. Play safe and have fun.
Yay.
Yay.
All right, how drunk am I getting?
Well, unfortunately, you've surpassed 21 minutes. So that'll be 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 7.
I'm just gonna finish this. Hi, Doctor. Actually, yes. Please, Dr. Leonard, you contributed way more to this than you know. Take 2 for me.
I'm gonna take 1 because I was somehow in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Surprise! Though really, with everything that I've seen playing with you, specifically through Boardroom Armageddon, stories I've heard about your role playing through others, you seemed a perfect example for that particular slide.
Aw, thank you.
Ooh, we
Okay.
have some questions.
Yeah, we definitely got questions.
Mm-hmm.
From gamers.
So speaking of which, Little Ribbit is actually the individual in question that I had the scene with, where we were basically online in separate rooms. So she's in the chat, and if you have questions for her, she can field some of those. So specific. Oh, there's a lot of good questions in there. I'll let someone else field those. I'm drinking.
Yeah, let's start off with gamers in Trinity. I'm gonna ask this out of order. Are safe words useful in non-BDSM role-playing scenarios?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We used some in the chat last night, and it was semi-joking, but in a lot of cases, if there's something that comes up, you're just like, no, I don't want to deal with that. You can absolutely have safe words be applicable in a non-BDSM context. A lot of examples I gave were specifically around the role-playing game table. And there's actually mechanics that people have come up with that are pretty much direct analogs. I don't know if they were intended that way, and I'm not going to ask the creators in that, because that's a slightly more personal question that I think they're comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
But there are definitely a lot of parallels.
Can I say some stuff about that too?
Oh, please. Yes.
Yeah, speaking as a game scholarship hat, putting on game runner hat, I helped to run a game in SoCal called Apocalypse 47, and we use a lot of what basically are safe gestures, right? Safe words, safe gestures. Come at me, bro is sort of a gesture if you want someone to dial up the intensity of a scene and continue with, yeah, hi, for seven, continue with some aggressive PvP adjacent play. So that's one really good example, checking in, thumbs up, thumbs down, keep it where it is. These gestures are basically nonverbal check-ins that allow you to do that without as much breaking the scene for other people.
Yep.
I was distracted with the chat, so I don't know if that overlapped too much with what you already just said.
No, like I didn't actually get into specifics to specific like nonverbal gestures or anything like that, because there's a lot of different ways to go about that. For like the okay check-in that you see in a lot of more immersive LARPs is one way to do it. We have it in the Mora system, Kickstarter out now. We have a version that's basically the clapper, which is kind of like the clapper board in like a movie. So you basically say, is this okay? And then if it's not, just cut. And you can kind of calibrate and negotiate if the scene needs to stop or if it just needs to be dialed down. Or, another more example, that's not in my contract is a very good way to say this topic is not okay. But it also but it's also an easy way that people who aren't really familiar with a lot of these safety mechanics can also understand them because it comes from a movie context. So it kind of bridges that gap in a lot of ways. I think there's some other questions going through it.
So to bring this up, when Trevor and I were role playing a couple, we had our own idiosyncratic gestures that we had set aside for moments, particularly because I experience touch aversion. But when you're role playing a relationship with someone, that can be kind of tricky. So I could tap him on the arm to express that I did not want to be physically touched in that scene. And so he could fluidly play through that and still, from an outward perspective, our characters would still not be having a tiff or anything, but just know where that boundary was for me more or so because of my out of character physicality in the moment.
Yeah, and personally, as somebody who is very not touch averse, thank you for setting that boundary and doing so in a way that was easy to communicate and easy to play through.
Super easy. It's just the little gestures. A common gesture that I've noticed in a lot of games is just like the okay symbol.
Oh yeah.
Someone, crying their tears, their face out, or shaking or anything, and you're like, I don't know if this is in game, out of game, and you just kind of like do a quick symbol, and they just do it back, and they're like, okay, there we go, we can keep on doing. Like it's little things, just to check in with people, which that's basically what everyone says. Just check in. It's BDSM. It's LARP, it's life in general. Check in with people and understand where people are at.
And I love that also bleeds over into non-LARP context. I've had people check in with me at big parties.
Oh yeah.
At your engagement party, actually, Trevor. I was like, I just traveled and immediately it was like a 9-hour social event and I was flagging and one of our mutual friends was like, are you okay? And I was like, oh. And just even having that is really useful. I would add one place in which I think we need more check-in, that also maybe relates to what you're talking about, is drinking at games. I know some games have a no drinking policy, some games have a very much drinking as a part of their culture, and I've been in situations where people have been LARPing as drunk very effectively to the point where I'm like, do we need to pull this person aside and make sure they're okay out of character? And so being able to communicate that without breaking immersion is really important.
Yeah, and not only just drinking, but also if you're role playing something that's really emotionally intense, like in the right kind of LARP situation, I can cry on cue. And I've had people come up to me and go, Renee, are you okay? But when I'm in the middle of a scene, and then I'm just like, no, I'm fine. Give them the thumbs up, and and I just kind of look up, and sometimes I look and say yes, and just carry on like a normal conversation. You've got tears streaming down my face, and that's how they know I am okay as a player.
One thing that we actually talked on Indicate, since I am a host and producer of Iron Game Designer on Indicate, and we had Naomi Clark, and she created a game called Consenticles.
Oh, I love that game.
And so it was interesting because she just took over, I think, the NYU Game Center chair just recently, within the next past couple of months, and we talked about consent practices, and she gave a very interesting take about consent, because at this point, like, it's good that consent mechanics, exist, but she does worry that there's a point where some people are so concerned with consent they almost over design it. And I didn't realize this until I was playing a D&D game, and they had 3 pages of yes and no topics that I had to go through, and it was actually anxiety producing because I had to think about, oh my god, you thought about that? I was just thinking that if it was just difficult, I just go X, but I didn't have to read a list of horrible things because they were trying to be so detailed to cover any possible thing that you could think of that you weren't consenting to. I'm like, oh my god, please don't.
Yeah,
That and it was so,
absolutely. You can drive yourself into an entire anxiety spiral trying to do that. So what I have the Mystical Rome game that I'm streaming on Sunday. I had specific things that I knew were going to come up, like absolutely were going to come up as topics.
mhm.
I had a list of things that might come up as topics, just kind of casually, and then things that absolutely would not come up because they were boundaries for me or they were against Twitch guidelines or what have you. When
Mhm.
I did casting questionnaires, I was like, okay, are you okay with are you okay with everything here? And then my next question was, is there something that I missed that you are not okay with? And the third question was, do I need to modify something that's on this list specifically for your comfort level?
Yeah.
And everybody who came in with it said that was a really comprehensive list. And the only things that, are going to be kind of squicky for me are things that are uniquely squicky to me. And I'm like,
Mhm.
cool, that's what I was going for.
Yeah. So to give people like an example, like content warning, I'm just gonna say a few things. So, like that list included, harm against children, harm against animals, killing child, and then it just got more and more graphic in a strange way of, I know you're trying to make sure we don't cover, and it's almost like they didn't think of, wait, are you going to role play all of this in your chronicle? Because you're going, I didn't know that this was what I was going to be dealing with, and there does have to be, I get the whole let's cover everything, but just let's not do that and drive anxiety into people by accident by trying to be that comprehensive, because I didn't need to see some of the things that they were thinking that were not ever going to come into a chronicle, but they wanted to be just sure. I'm like, please don't. There is a balance. Some common sense is good.
Yeah, and actually, I want to give props specifically to Eric Jackson in the chat for talking about the Monty Cook Games consent checklist, because that's actually a
Yeah.
really good resource. And I know people who have adapted that checklist for specific game settings where there may be some more extreme items. Like, for example, World of Darkness games are probably going to deal with a lot more extreme themes than maybe
Mhm.
some fantasy games. So, but having that as a good baseline basically removes a lot of effort on the behalf of the DM, GM, ST, cat herder, whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
to, think about, oh God, what are all of these things that could potentially trigger my players?
Mhm. Yeah. And like, and a lot of these are not just, to emphasize to several people, it's not because we're trying to be politically correct and not to hurt people's feelings. It's also part about, now that we know that this part is okay, let's go. We can go
Exactly.
really, really hard into this because we absolutely know we already have established a same page communication. It's like we can now go for gore. I can now rip out your throat and this will be okay. And
Yeah. I'd like to piggyback off of that. So for the 847 in our first game, we had 3 different settings for our opening mod. And we had, one of them was the black bag mod, in which they had pillowcases that they had brought over their own heads. They were They weren't actually in the end having their hands secured because we were worried about safety because we were going to walk them around and it's an uneven footing situation, but we used zip ties on each wrist to signal that and then they were meant to keep them together to signal that they were tied up, and then they were loaded in the back of a U-Haul truck and screamed at. And this was all consensual because they had opted in and they had a list of what was likely to happen like weeks in advance. But I accidentally messaged to a player's father because they have the same name on Facebook. That was fun. but other than that, it went off without a hitch. And we had other experiences.
I mean, at the same time, hey, were they okay with it?
Yeah, they were fine. Their dad was apparently cool, but that could have gotten weird. But yeah, it went really well, and I think set the tone for a post-apocalyptic game. But we're out of character. We're very concerned about safety and consent, and started it off real good.
Yeah. I do want to start wrapping things up a little bit. Part of it is again, I did get my second COVID shot this today, and so I feel like it's time for me to rest. But first of all, amazing lectures from everyone here. Like, I am very, very happy whenever I manage to put point and clink because I do learn so many things here. And let's go around the table. Where can people find you on the internet? I'm going to start off with Diana.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Dr. Diana Leonard. And there's a link tree on Instagram that can take you to my academia page if you want to read the paper that Tessa and I wrote or any of the other things that I've written over time. I also tweeted out my resources to at Dr. Diana Leonard. If you want to see the long list of papers or read some of them, I'd love to chat with you about it over Twitter or Instagram.
Awesome. I am liking and retweeting that now because that's amazing. Renee, where can people find you on the internet?
I can be found pretty much anywhere on the internet as Hedgie Cleric. Pretty much anywhere, not everywhere. My Facebook page for my stream is at legit Hedgie Cleric. And upcoming projects include I have an interview with the folks at Flamma Mysteries for the Dykeman Files RPG. That went to Kickstarter. And on Sunday, I will be running a session of Mystical Rome, which is one of the settings specifically that is being published as part of the Mora cinematic role-playing game system, which is also on Kickstarter. And actually coming up in July, I'll be doing a guest GM spot specifically with Geek Therapeutics. I literally said all of this stuff at the beginning of my presentation because I thought I was probably going to be hammered enough that I was going to forget it all now.
Congrats.
Trevor, where can people find you on the internet?
You will be able to find me very soon on all the things as the Drunken Archaeologist. I'll be on Instagram, on Twitter, on YouTube, on
Oh,
Twitch,
shoot, I'm going to add this right now.
I will be starting this Friday, will be the premiere of the Drunken Archaeologist, where I will answer all of your deep questions about archaeology, like why do archaeologists lick everything? When does it become grave robbing as opposed to archaeology? And more serious questions like indigenous rights and whose land you're actually on and stuff like that, as well as any questions that you honestly have about it. So that'll be this Friday at like 7, I believe. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
If you can do me a favor and write that username in chat so we know to find you. Also, because I might be tired, but I don't exactly know how to spell archaeologist. Because I'm like, wait, how's it spelled? Wait,
there are multiple ways to spell archaeology.
There are multiple ways to spell it.
There's no K's. There's no K's in it.
Archaeologist.
Archaeologist.
Oh, okay. That's what I missed. Got it.
Archaeo.
Archaeo.
Oh, there's an instant follow.
Yeah. Tessa, where can people find you on the internet?
People can find me on the internet at Twitter at AssetTessa1 or AssetTessa101 on Facebook. Clicky, I put in the chat. I'm working on a ton of projects as always. But I'd like to plug instead Jeff Barber's TTRPG that just got funded for $100,000 on Kickstarter, Blue Planet. He used to be my dorm dad. Long story. I went to boarding school for girls. There's a time. He's a marine biologist that also is a teacher, and he made a TTRPG all about climate change, hard sci-fi, and what whales probably think about. So if you want to play a TTRPG where you can make a joke of a corporate bounty hunter, his dolphin sidekick that's also a preacher, and a space cowboy walk and swim into the bar, that's the one for you. Blue Planet. Play it. It's great.
All right, Ruben, where can people find you on the internets?
Oh, hi everybody. I'm the internet's Ruben Bressler. You can follow me everywhere at MOXREUBY. I am one of the co-hosts of the Magic Mics podcast. That's MAGICMICS on Twitch, and then MIGICMICS cast on Twitter. I am the Dungeon Master for the Broken Pact. You can go to the link tree for the Broken Pact and see all 4 seasons and all the extra specials that we did. I'm also the Dungeon Master for Tales from Tetheria on the Lasercorn YouTube channel, where I Dungeon Mastered for a bunch of, YouTube people. And yeah, I do D&D and Magic the Gathering things. I don't really know what I have coming up soon. I'm also a voiceover actor. I do a bunch of commercials for, internet ads. You might hear my voice on random YouTube videos. I don't know. I'm a vagabond roustabout. I don't really know what I'm doing or where I'm sleeping the next week or two, but I'm sure that when you follow me on Twitter that I'll update you all.
All right, and I am your host, one of your hosts, Ryan Omega, and I'm here on Live Action Roleplay. You will see me on Saturdays at 1 p.m. Running a D&D game called Poison Tulips, which is about tabloid bards that deal with scandal in the Duchy of Scandalabra. On Mondays, I am one of the hosts and producer of Iron Game Designer, where we talk to various game designers from all over the world and talk about the process. And we put them all into a competition, which is coming up on the 24th, where they will game jam and come up with a game in less than an hour with all eyes watching. And so that's a lot of fun to help produce. I am also working on some Shakespeare stuff. I am working on a series called Breaking Bard, where we will take select scenes from popular Shakespeare plays, and some of us will readapt them and have those same performers adapt them. So I am doing Romeo and Juliet, and its adaptation, a LARP of Edgelords, although I am probably changing it to, it popped up in my head, might want to call it Verona LARP, but I think there's actual LARP called Verona LARP. So if there isn't, that's what I will name it. And if there is a LARP of Edgelords, it is. And it actually takes the idea of making the Romeo and Juliet plot secondary to the feud between the Capulets and the Montagues. So I am still casting for that and hope to finish casting next week.
If I wasn't going to be in Texas the day that you were broadcasting, I would totally be like, I want to be your LARP mom. But I am not available for that, unfortunately.
Oh my goodness. And again, thank you to all the watchers. Thank you to our Patreon subscribers, where you'll see some of the content as I'm translating it into 2021 speech that takes place in a Romeo and Juliet LARP. And I want to at least share some love. So I'm gonna share love with another channel I know. I'm gonna share it with the Scabby Rooster, who's who many of us know and love, and we're going to go and raid them. So let's see, what should our call be? Our raid call be?
Shenanigans.
Safe word!
Safe word.
I'm a bad person.
Shenanigans.
So y'all know.
Shenanigans.
Shenanigans. That is a perfectly good safe word.
Shenanigans. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our lecturers for this amazing information. And we will see you next time Be safe out there. Love you all. Bye. And we have rated and we're good.